The blood mist clung to the spire of Castle Vraden like a morbid shroud, a permanent testament to the reigning power of the Crimson Matriarch, Queen Seraphina. She stood on the highest battlement, her gaze, two searing points of ruby light, fixed disdainfully on the vast, ruined field stretching below. Her platinum hair, a stark contrast to the black scales of her enormous folded wings, shimmered under the bruised sky. Legends, she scoffed, the sound a low, resonant rumble that echoed the ancient stone around her. The sheer audacity of their myths. Human champions, unbeatable swordsmen, the light of the vanquished. Such frivolous noise woven by the weak to comfort their pathetic, fleeting lives. Beside her, General Kalen, a hulking figure in obsidian armor, dipped his head. My queen, their oral traditions are indeed exaggerated. Yet even exaggerated accounts carry a fraction of truth. The last human crusader, Aegon of the North, troubled our borders for decades before finally being subdued. Seraphina did not even turn. Her gold and bronze cuirass, intricately etched with predatory runes, caught the faint, eerie glow radiating from the castle's deep windows. Trouble, Kalen, is a child's tantrum against a true storm. Aegon was stubborn, yes, but he was mortal. He died. All humans fall, consumed by the very brevity they claim gives them strength. She gestured towards the enormous host assembling in the plains, thousands of armored vampires, Dampiers, and ghoulish mercenaries preparing for the final, definitive march into the heart of the last human kingdom, Atheria. This was not a raid, it was an extinction. My objective is simple, to dissolve their hope entirely. To show them that their warriors are merely sharp toys easily broken. We march tomorrow. I want no living remnants by the end of the week. Kalen hesitated, an unusual sign of unease. And the scouting report, my queen? The one regarding the old ruins of the Monastery of the Silent Blade? Seraphina finally moved, her crimson eyes narrowing. Ah yes. The tale of the Shadow Walker. Another ghost story for the dying fire. What folly do the scouts report this time? They report that the ruins are not empty, Seraphina. One human remains. A lone sentinel. He has resisted all incursions into the surrounding valleys for the last 3 months. Our advance patrols were intercepted and annihilated. Quickly and silently. We found bodies, but the pattern of the wounds suggests not just skill, but an almost inhuman speed and precision. The surviving few mentioned only a flash of steel and the silent approach of a shadow. They call him Kalen, the general reported, using his own name, a tradition where the most fearsome enemy was named after the reporting commander as a sign of respect and fear. Seraphina stopped, a genuine, albeit wicked, smile curving her perfect lips. The audacity. To name a phantom after my trusted general. Very well. Let us observe this Kalen, before we crush him. It will be a suitable, small entertainment before the great slaughter. The next morning the queen did not lead the main force. Instead she took a small elite guard, General Kalen, for winged sentinels and a handful of damper trackers, towards the ruins. The land became desolate, scarred by ancient battles, choked with thorny, black vegetation. When they reached the edge of the valley, the sight was chilling even for vampires. The ground was littered not with the bodies of the human patrols, but with the dismembered remains of Seraphina's own soldiers. Every body was cleanly severed, limbs detached with surgical coldness. There was no chaos, no struggle marks, only precise, lethal disassembly. A butcher, not a warrior, Seraphina murmured, but her contemptuous tone was strained. The meticulousness was unsettling. A quarter-mile further, the crumbling stone walls of the monastery came into view. Standing at the central archway, silhouetted against the weak morning light, was a figure. He wore simple, dark leather armor, weathered and patched. He was not towering or impossibly muscled. He looked, at first glance, utterly insignificant. His only notable feature was the long, heavy bastard sword resting point down in the soil beside him, its blade reflecting the dull light like polished obsidian. The human warrior. General Kalen took a step forward. He is waiting for us, my queen. A challenge? Observe, Kalen, Seraphina commanded, her voice low. He is not challenging us. He is simply there. A rock against the tide. Tell me, human, what is your purpose in this empty graveyard? She called out, her voice amplified by her power, resonating across the ruined valley. The figure Elias did not flinch, did not move a muscle. He slowly, deliberately reached out and gripped the hilt of his sword. He pulled it from the earth, and the faint, grating sound of metal against stone was the loudest noise in the valley. My purpose, Elias's voice finally came back, clear and strangely calm, devoid of fear or bombast, is simple. This valley is the last sanctuary for the survivors of the riverbend villages. They pass through here tonight. I hold the line until then. Saraphina let out a short, sharp burst of cold laughter. You, a single brittle man? Against an army? Against me? This is beyond ridiculous, it is tragic. Step aside, human. Your life, though meaningless, is yours to keep, provided you run. Elias raised the sword, the massive blade coming to rest casually over his shoulder. The posture was relaxed, yet utterly focused. I am told, Elias said, his gaze meeting Seraphina's without wavering, that the matriarch of Vraden is a legend of power. A nightmare made flesh. I find myself equally underwhelmed. You are merely one more tyrant made of vanity and bone, easily cut down. The air went dead silent. Seraphina's crimson eyes flared into burning slits. She had faced ridicule before, but never this quiet, absolute dismissal from a creature she considered little more than prey. Silence this insolence, General, she hissed. Do not kill him. Bring me his sword hand. I want him to watch us march through his sanctuary. General Kalen, relieved at the order, let out a war cry and rushed forward, his immense strength generating a cloud of dust. The 4 winged sentinels followed, flanking him with brutal speed. And then it happened. The human warrior, Elias, disappeared. Not faded. Not ran. But vanished. Kalen's heavy, downward slash met only air. Before the general could even register the miss, a blinding flicker of steel erupted from the side. Elias was already past him, moving not with a run, but a controlled low-to-the-ground glide that defied physics. The movement was a practiced dance of death, utterly silent. The first winged sentinel to reach the spot let out a strangled half-gasp as Elias's sword, moving faster than the eye could track, sliced through the sentinel's armor, clean across the waist. The top half of the vampire guard slid off the bottom, the armor and flesh severed in one perfect, seamless cut. No struggle. No noise. Just gravity taking effect. Before the second sentinel could react, Elias pivoted, the massive bastard sword reversing its trajectory in a whisper-quick flick. It was not a chop but a snap. The blade struck the sentinel's neck precisely where the helmet met the gorget. The head separated, tumbling instantly. General Kalen roared, fury overcoming his shock, and swung his massive shield in a devastating sweep. Elias sidestepped the blow, the edge of the shield missing his head by an inch. In the fraction of a second Kalen's balance was compromised. Elias did not strike at the general's body. Instead, he ducked low and severed the tendon group behind Kalen's right knee with a short, brutal upward cut. The mighty general of the vampires collapsed with a jarring crunch. All of this transpired in the span of maybe 3 heartbeats. Saraphina, the great Crimson Matriarch, stood frozen on the ridge, her wings involuntarily stretching and flexing in a primal display of shock and sudden, cold fear. Her disbelief was total. This was not a warrior, this was a force of nature. His movements were not reckless or heroic, they were cold, scientific applications of lethality. He moved exactly enough and no more. The 2 remaining sentinels finally rallied, attacking from opposite sides. Elias met them both simultaneously. He blocked the first sentinel's sword thrust with his own blade, diverting the force downward, and in the same instant, used the momentum of the second sentinel's downward chop to propel himself backward, rolling smoothly over the collapsed Kalen. He rose instantly, sword held in a reverse grip, and spun. The spinning motion was not defensive, it was the mechanism for his attack. The blade flashed out, a silver blur catching the dull light. One sentinel's arm, still holding the sword, fell to the ground. The other sentinel staggered back, clutching a wound that bled black, thick blood. Elias did not pursue. He simply stood, his chest barely rising, his breathing steady as if he had just taken a leisurely stroll. He looked toward Seraphina, the blade glistening, and waited. Seraphina's mind raced, processing the impossible. Her best general for elite sentinels, crippled, dead or maimed, in seconds. The stories she had scoffed at, the legends she had ridiculed, were suddenly manifesting before her, condensed into a single human, Elias. His skill was not of this world. Stop, Seraphina commanded, her voice barely a whisper, yet holding the weight of her ancient power. The 2 surviving damper trackers froze in place. She stepped forward, descending the slope herself, her expression a frightening mask of fury mixed with genuine fascination. This human was not a champion. He was a perfect weapon. And he was standing in her way. You, Seraphina spat the word, her ruby eyes blazing down at him from a close distance. You are no mere warrior. What are you? Elias tilted his head slightly, a shadow passing over his cold, weary eyes. I am the shadow you ignored, matriarch. I am the silence between your heartbeats. And I am what remains when hope has died. He pointed the tip of his sword directly at her breastplate. My name is Elias. And you will not pass. Seraphina stared at the impossible human. This was not the end of a fight, it was the unexpected beginning of a new war. The thrill of battle, a feeling long dormant, surged through her cold veins. She had come to observe a joke. She had witnessed a miracle of violence. The silence between Seraphina and Elias stretched taut, thicker than the blood mist of Vraden. It was a silence filled with the grinding gears of ancient pride encountering undeniable, immediate threat. Seraphina, who commanded legions and spanned centuries, was being challenged by a single human, and the humiliation was a burning sensation she hadn't felt since her mortal days. She raised a gauntlet hand, dismissing her remaining guards, who instinctively backed away, dragging the whimpering General Kalen with them. Kalen's shame was absolute, a powerful vampire brought low by a tendon cut. An impressive spectacle, Elias, Seraphina finally said, her voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous purr. Her wings flared slightly, casting enormous, terrifying shadows that reached the base of the monastery walls. But a child can swing a blade. True power lies in endurance, in survival. Your movement is finite. Your life is measured in breaths, mine in epochs. You cannot defeat me. Elias did not lower his sword. I do not need to defeat you, matriarch. I only need to stop you for now. And I only need one breath to make a mortal wound. Seraphina laughed, a sound that lacked warmth and promised pain. Such poetry for a grave marker. You have witnessed my strength, human. Do you truly believe a mere sword can touch me? She took a decisive step forward. The air pressure shifted. The very atmosphere around her grew heavy and cold. Her eyes glowed brighter, casting long red beams. This was not the posture of a fighter, but of a queen executing a judgment. I was born of fire and shadow, Elias. My skin is harder than iron and my speed. Before she could finish the boast, Elias moved. It was not the flash of speed he used against her guards, but a coiled spring release of sheer, focused power. He lunged, not with a flourish but with brutal, linear efficiency. The massive bastard sword, wielded with impossible speed and force, was aimed directly at the junction of her neck and shoulder. Seraphina's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock momentarily replacing her arrogance. His speed was almost equal to hers, a terrifying, unnatural parody. She brought her armored forearm up to block the blow. The impact was a deafening crang of metal striking metal. The force of the strike was so immense it didn't just rattle Seraphina's bones. It actually pushed her back 3 solid paces, her iron-hard feet carving deep trenches into the stone-strewn soil. Her gauntlet was heavily dented, and the impact sent a deep, burning ache up her arm. Elias did not pause. He didn't wait for her recovery. He pressed the advantage, launching into a flurry of attacks that were less like sword fighting and more like a controlled, metal storm. Each strike was aimed at the weak points of her ancient armor. Joints, hinges, and the narrow gap beneath her crown. Seraphina was forced onto the defensive, an unheard-of occurrence for the Crimson Matriarch. She parried with her sword, a curved blade of blackened steel, meeting Elias's blows with desperate, rapid movements. The clashing metal screamed in protest. What shook Seraphina most was not just the power but the intent. Elias was fighting not to survive but to kill. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, just cold, perfect killing focus. One strike, a quick feint followed by a lethal thrust, slipped past her guard and glanced off her breastplate. While the armor held, the blow was precise enough to leave a long, deep scar in the ancient metal. The contact crackled with strange energy, and Seraphina felt a brief, agonizing spike of pain. Not from the force but from something inherent to the blade itself. She beat the air, creating a gust of wind and debris that momentarily blinded Elias. She used that fraction of a second to leap back, landing 20 feet away, crouching low, breathing heavily, a sight her General Kalen had never once witnessed. "What is that blade?" she demanded, staring at the long, dark sword Elias held. "It cuts deeper than mere steel." Elias watched her, his expression impassive. "It is a weapon forged in the fires of lost hope, matriarch. It is consecrated with the final breath of those your kind murdered. It is called vengeance." Seraphina studied the scar on her chest plate, running a finger over the marred surface. Beneath the armor, her immortal skin was bruised, almost weeping crimson. The attack had been powerful, but the true threat was the blade's inherent, latent energy, something that seemed to negate her ancient defenses. She knew then that she could not subdue him easily. A direct, prolonged confrontation would waste time she did not have, and risk an injury she could not afford before the final campaign. The human warriors she scorned had truly bred a monster, a single-point defense that was more effective than any army. You have your moments, Shadow Walker, she conceded, her voice chillingly calm. But time favors the eternal. Your survivors will still be caught and you will eventually fall, spent and alone. This monastery is now besieged. We will starve you out or bury you under 10,000 of my soldiers. Elias simply shifted his weight. Try it. I have prepared this place for a siege. And before your first 10,000 reach this wall, I will have cut down 10 score more. Seraphina narrowed her eyes. She knew he was telling the truth. He had already proven his capability. To commit her main force here was tactical idiocy. Her objective was Atheria, not this ruin. Very well, Elias, she said, straightening up, her queenly poise returning. The path to Atheria is long, but we will meet again at the gates. And when I take your city, I will drag you through the ruins and show you the true face of despair. I will not send soldiers next time. I will bring the fire of my birthright. With a final, contemptuous glance that lingered on Elias's unwavering figure, Seraphina launched herself into the sky. Her massive wings beat the air, and she ascended quickly, becoming a black, winged speck against the gray morning. Her remaining guards and the wounded Kalen quickly retreated, disappearing over the ridge. The sudden stillness was immense. Elias stood in the center of the killing ground, surrounded by the wreckage of the vampire patrol. He watched the queen fly away until she was completely gone. Only then did he allow himself a small, ragged breath. He was hurt. The force of Seraphina's block had jarred his ribs, and his muscles screamed from the immense effort of that controlled frenzy. He did not relax, however. He knew Seraphina would not be deterred. She was merely postponing the execution. Elias wiped a smear of black vampire blood from the ancient rune-carved blade, Vengeance, and sheathed it with a heavy sigh. He turned and walked into the ruins of the Monastery of the Silent Blade. He entered the central courtyard. The place was not empty. Hidden beneath layers of cleverly disguised rubble and ancient wards were the survivors, approximately 50 men, women, and children from the riverbend villages, huddled together in nervous silence. A young woman, no older than 20, stepped forward. Her name was Lyra. She had fiery red hair and eyes that were too old for her face, eyes that had seen too much loss. She was the informal leader of this desperate group. Elias, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling but holding firm. We heard the fighting. We heard the queen's voice. Did we buy enough time? Elias walked past them, heading toward a large, stone archway hidden beneath woven camouflage. We bought tonight, Lyra. No more. Seraphina is wounded but not stopped. She will circle back or send a far larger force. Her main army marches on Atheria tomorrow, and this valley is the last defensible path to the north for your people. He pulled back the camouflage, revealing a narrow, dark opening leading into a natural tunnel. It was a passage known only to the monks of old, a dangerous, treacherous route that led through the mountain passes towards the city of Atheria. The passage is ready, Elias said, his voice flat. It is slow, cold, and there are risks from the cave wildlife. But it is unseen. You must start moving now. The children and the elderly first. The sun sets in 6 hours. By dawn you must be far into the tunnels. Lyra looked at the dark opening, then back at Elias. And you? You held the line against their queen. Are you coming with us? Elias turned back, his figure silhouetted against the broken archway where he had faced Seraphina. My role is not guide, Lyra. It is shield. I remain here until the last of your people is safely inside. If Seraphina sends a scouting party back tonight, she will find me waiting. Lyra approached him, her hands clasped tightly. We have heard the stories, Elias. That you are the last of the Order of the Silent Blade. That you have been fighting alone for years. Why do you do this? You could have run north, lived in the wild. Elias stared out at the cold valley, at the bodies of his enemies. My path was sealed long ago, Lyra. The Order vowed to protect the last bastions of humanity. I am the last vow, and I have a debt. A debt I cannot repay until I have seen the Matriarch of Vraden burn. He pointed his sword towards the dark opening. Go. Your journey is long. My vigil has just begun. Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew there was no arguing with the Shadow Walker. She began organizing the nervous survivors, guiding them into the perilous, hopeful dark of the tunnel. Elias stood guard, the heavy weight of vengeance in his hand, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, waiting for the first sign that the Nightmare Queen had changed her mind. He had bought them a night. The true long war was still marching towards them. Seraphina did not fly back to Castle Vraden immediately. Instead, she circled high above the valley for an hour, watching the silent monastery ruins from an altitude where she was invisible to the naked human eye. Below, the shadow walker, Elias, was a dark, unmoving speck of defiance. Her armored hand rested on the still-dented area of her cuirass. The cold, raw truth of the encounter finally settled in. She had been tested, and she had been forced to retreat from a single, perishable human. The sheer technical efficiency of his fighting style had been terrifying. It was not courage that guided his blade, but a mastery so profound it bordered on the supernatural. The sword, vengeance, had rattled her ancient existence. "He is not a threat to my army," she mused aloud, the words carried only by the thin, cold air. "He is a threat to the idea of my army. An active symbol. A single spark of hope. If the remaining human kingdoms hear that one man halted the Crimson Matriarch, the flame of resistance will become a wildfire." Her strategy shifted immediately. The objective was no longer merely annihilation, it was psychological dominance. She had to ensure Elias and his actions were erased from history before the main march. She veered southeast towards a forward command outpost hidden in the foothills, a temporary garrison known as the Iron Spire Barracks, commanded by a cunning, brutal damper lord named Valerius. At the Monastery of the Silent Blade, Elias stood his vigil as the last of the survivors, led by Lyra, disappeared into the maw of the mountain tunnel. The setting sun cast long, weary shadows across the killing field. The silence was now complete, broken only by the cold wind whistling through the broken arches. Elias finally allowed himself to sit, leaning against a cold stone pillar. He closed his eyes, his grip tightening on the hilt of vengeance. The sword felt heavy not just with steel but with memories. His mind drifted back to the dead. He saw a village that once stood by the river bend, bathed in the soft light of a harvest moon. Not the desolate ruins Lyra had just fled, but a warm, vibrant place. He saw Liana, her eyes the color of warm honey, her laughter like a gentle stream. She was the reason he had abandoned the cloistered life of the Order of the Silent Blade, trading spiritual discipline for mortal love. They had been happy for 3 glorious years. The scene shifted violently. The peaceful night was shattered by the arrival of the vampire horde, led by a ruthless lieutenant of Seraphina's court, a brute named Lord Forlag. Elias, though trained, had been living a civilian life. He had fought, desperately and fiercely, wielding an ordinary blade. He remembered the smell of smoke and blood. He remembered failing to reach Liana in time. Forlag, fueled by a sadistic pleasure, had pinned Liana to the ground not with a sword, but with a massive ornamental crucifix ripped from the village church, impaling her heart. Elias had been left alive, crippled and watching, a deliberate cruelty. Forlag had wanted him to feel the complete weight of failure before delivering the final blow. But before Forlag could finish the act, the advance of a small, desperate band of Atherian guards had forced the lieutenant to retreat, thinking Elias mortally wounded. That moment, Liana's last, fading light in her eyes as she looked at him, and the chilling coldness of the crucifix against her chest, was the debt. It was not just Seraphina he sought, but the entire system of cruelty she commanded, symbolized by the lieutenant, Lord Forlag, who still served her. Elias knew that true vengeance meant dismantling the queen's pride, brick by painful brick. When he recovered, he found the ancient, hidden forge of the Silent Blade Order and forged vengeance. A blade meant to cut not just flesh, but the very magical essence that gave vampires their strength. He became the Shadow Walker, an entity of pure, cold retribution. The sight of Lyra and the others escaping was the only thing that kept the memory's icy grip from crushing him. They were the redemption of the dead. They were Liana's legacy. Meanwhile, 20 miles away at the Iron Spire Barracks, Queen Seraphina landed with a powerful thud that cracked the earth of the courtyard. Lord Valerius, a tall, thin damper with a reputation for merciless efficiency, immediately dropped to one knee, terrified by the rage radiating from his queen. "My queen, to what do we owe this unexpected presence?" Valerius stammered. Seraphina ripped off her gauntlet, throwing it down. The dent in the bronze shone clearly in the torchlight. "I have encountered a pestilence, Valerius. A human. A single man named Elias." She recounted the fight, emphasizing the precision and the near-supernatural speed of the warrior. Valerius listened in stunned silence. "This is not merely a warrior," Seraphina declared, pacing the cold stone. "This is a weapon manufactured specifically to kill creatures like us. He must be removed with extreme prejudice, and without committing our primary invasion force." Valerius, understanding the gravity, asked, "How large a detachment, Seraphina?" "Not a detachment. I want the Blood Court assassins," she commanded. The Blood Court assassins were the Queen's secret shadow arm, silent killers who operated outside the military structure, known for their ability to eliminate targets without leaving a trace of their involvement. "But my Queen, the assassins are reserved for political dissent within Atheria. Their deployment here will delay the preparation for the main march on the capital." "I am changing the priority, Valerius. Elias is a greater political threat than any dissident counselor. Kill him and the monastery. And when you are done, I want a message broadcast to every last human village still standing. The Shadow Walker was a legend and legends die. Quickly and quietly. His body will never be found." Seraphina paused, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "And Valerius, I want to deploy a different kind of force as well. I want to deploy Forlag and his legion. Let him return to that valley. He is eager for blood, and his heavy-handed methods will not alert the enemy that we are moving our main force." Valerius looked confused. "Lord Forlag? But his methods are often counterproductive, my Queen." Seraphina smiled, a cold, predatory gesture. "Precisely. Forlag's objective is not to kill Elias. His objective is to distract Elias with sheer overwhelming noise and fury. While Forlag engages him at the monastery, the assassins will be looking for the tunnel he used. I want the survivors, Valerius. I want the hope he protected to be crushed before his eyes. That will break him faster than any blade." She placed a hand on the scarred breastplate, the memory of Elias's cold defiance fueling her rage. "When he sees the failure of his mission, I will return. I will personally take vengeance from his dying hands. Go. Execute this immediately. The sun must not rise on a defiant human warrior." Lord Valerius bowed deeply, fear and excitement mixing in his damper veins. The hunt for the Shadow Walker was now a two-pronged, deeply personal and highly political campaign. The night deepened, the air turning bitter cold as it crept through the broken windows of the Monastery of the Silent Blade. Elias did not sleep. He patrolled the perimeter, his movements silent, placing small hidden tripwires and setting up ancient wards using powdered silver and carved stones. He was preparing the ground for a siege, not by fighting, but by making the enemy pay for every inch of entry. He paused by the shattered bell tower, running a hand over the rough stone where he knew the monastery's main defensive runes had once been carved. The order had always preached that defense was not about strength, but about preparation, patience, and knowing the enemy's nature. Seraphina's nature was arrogance, and her commander's nature was brutality and haste. He would use that against them. Around midnight, he felt the first tremor, not of fear but of heavy, coordinated movement on the valley floor. It was Lord Forlag. Forlag did not believe in stealth or strategy. He believed in overwhelming force and intimidation. His approach was signaled by the rhythmic, heavy tramp of hundreds of armored feet and the eerie, synchronized howling of his blood legion. Elias moved quickly, taking up a position high in the ruins, his dark clothing blending perfectly with the shadows. He counted about 500 soldiers, a mix of heavy armored vampires and fast-moving feral ghouls. Leading them was Lord Forlag himself, an enormous, scarred vampire lieutenant, clad in black iron armor that was more barbaric than regal. Forlag carried a spiked mace that dragged on the ground, kicking up sparks. "Find him. Find the miserable human relic." Forlag's voice boomed, thick with bloodlust and impatience, echoing across the valley. "I want him alive but barely. The Queen demands a show." The legion surged forward, an undisciplined wave of malice. Elias let the first 50 soldiers pass the outer perimeter. He was waiting for the perfect moment. When the mass of the legion was tightly packed and entering the narrow gateway of the ruins, he triggered his first trap. A heavy, stone lintel, carefully destabilized above the main archway, gave way with a sickening crack. It was not a killing blow but a massive distraction. The falling stones crushed several ghouls and created instant chaos, blocking the main path. Forlag roared in frustration. "Through the sides. Flank him." As the soldiers attempted to move through the flanking ruins, they encountered Elias's next defensive layer, carefully placed steel caltrops and hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes. The movement stalled, punctuated by screams of pain and surprise. The brute force was stumbling over its own momentum. Elias struck then, moving like lightning from his high perch. He targeted the officers coordinating the advance, eliminating them with quick, surgical strikes of vengeance before disappearing back into the deeper shadows of the ruin. He was a phantom, forcing the large, slow legion to fight small, individual battles in the dark, unfamiliar ruins. Simultaneously, high above in the treacherous, wind-swept mountain pass, the path of silent sighs, the second threat was deployed. 3 members of the Blood Court assassins, led by a cold, agile female vampire named Serpenta, moved with terrifying absolute silence. They were not clad in armor but in oiled black leather, their weapons being razor-sharp, poison daggers and crossbows. Their mission was specific: to locate the escape tunnel and kill the survivors, crippling Elias's motivation. They found the hidden mouth of the tunnel within minutes. Serpenta knelt, touching the disturbed soil. He is good. But not good enough. The human scent is fresh. She signaled her 2 subordinates, Riven and Slick. Riven, take the forward scout position. Confirm the trail is clear of traps. Slick, cover the entrance. I'm going in. We take the red-haired female alive. The queen wants her despair to be absolute. The rest are disposable. Inside the cramped, dark passage, Lyra guided the terrified villagers. She carried a small, sputtering lantern, her face set in grim determination. The air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of minerals. They had been moving for hours, the journey arduous and slow. Keep moving. The light of the passage is ahead, Lyra urged. They were deep within the mountain when Serpenta caught up. She moved like a viper, gliding through the tunnel, her soft footsteps muffled by the rushing wind echoing through the stone shaft. She bypassed Riven and Slick, finding the main group. Serpenta attacked the rearguard, 2 older men struggling with a heavy cart of supplies. She didn't use a dramatic flourish. A quick thrust of her poisoned blade into their spinal cords, and they collapsed, instantly paralyzed and silently choking. The survivors heard only a faint thud. Lyra stopped, her breath catching in her throat. What was that? She whispered, fear spiking in her voice. Serpenta revealed herself, stepping into the dim lantern light. She was unervingly beautiful, her eyes glowing with cold amusement. A pause, little lamb. The Shadow Walker may be holding the front door, but the queen prefers to enter through the back. Lyra screamed the only warning she could manage: assassins. But Serpenta moved instantly, a whirlwind of blades aiming for Lyra, intending to subdue her quickly. But Lyra, driven by survival and the desperate hope Elias had given them, reacted by hurling the sputtering lantern at the assassin. The oil and glass shattered against Serpenta's face. The momentary shock and the brief flicker of flame gave Lyra the precious second she needed. She didn't run towards the exit. Instead, she scrambled up a nearby pile of rocks and debris, a collapsed section of the tunnel that was perilously unstable. You won't have us, Lyra screamed, grabbing a heavy, loose stone. Serpenta hissed in frustration, wiping the oil from her eyes. Fools. I am the last thing you will ever see. Back at the monastery, Elias was fighting a desperate battle of attrition. He was everywhere and nowhere, a silver flash in the oppressive blackness, bleeding Lord Forlag's legion dry. Forlag, enraged by the constant casualties and the inability to corner the human, finally saw movement near a deep, overgrown well, a small hidden passage Elias used to move between the inner and outer ruins. There. He runs. Surround the well. I will pull him out. Forlag roared, charging towards the spot, mace dragging. As Forlag approached the well, an agonizing spike of pain shot through Elias's mind, a deep, visceral fear that felt alien yet connected. It was the fear of the survivors, Lyra's fear. The assassins had found the tunnel. Elias's cold focus wavered for the first time. He had to choose: continue fighting the blunt, distracting force of Forlag, or abandon the defense to help the survivors. The debt demanded he protect them. He knew he couldn't get back to the tunnel in time. As Forlag reached the well, anticipating victory, Elias made his move. Instead of retreating, he launched himself out of the well, directly at Forlag. It was a calculated, suicidal risk. You face me, demon. Elias screamed, his voice raw, fueled by the panic he felt for Lyra. Forlag laughed, a thick, brutal sound. Finally. I will crush you, Shadow Walker. He brought his mace down in a heavy, arcing swing, a blow meant to flatten the human. Elias met the mace with vengeance, but instead of blocking, he redirected the colossal force with a practiced move, deflecting the mace's inertia sideways, causing Forlag's own momentum to twist him off balance. Then, with the assassin's fear still burning in his mind, Elias plunged vengeance deep into the weakest point of Forlag's heavy armor, the elbow joint, twisting the blade violently. The vampire screamed, a sound of absolute agony and shock. Elias ripped the blade out and vanished again, leaving the reeling Lord Forlag to be trampled by his own confused, disorganized legion. He knew Forlag was not dead, but he was incapacitated, buying him crucial minutes. Now he ran. He abandoned the monastery, running full out towards the ridge, towards the path of silent sighs. He was leaving the main battle behind to face the greater, hidden threat. He was racing against the highly trained assassins who were already deep in the tunnels with his people. Elias ran, the speed he achieved blurring the landscape. He moved with the desperate, focused energy of a man fighting not for his own life, but for the last vestiges of his humanity. The internal conflict was agonizing. He was abandoning the defensive position he had spent days fortifying, giving Lord Forlag's crippled legion the chance to recover. But the threat to Lyra and the survivors was immediate and absolute. He reached the mouth of the path of silent sighs tunnel, his chest heaving, though his movements remained unervingly silent. He plunged into the dark opening without hesitation. The sound of the fighting at the monastery was already fading behind him. The tunnel was narrow and slick. The air was colder here, carrying the faint, metallic scent of blood and fear. Elias, relying on his training from the Order of the Silent Blade, moved in absolute darkness, the tunnel walls guiding him. He didn't need light. His senses were finely tuned to the unnatural silence of the assassins and the terrified breathing of the humans. He heard the struggle before he saw it. A faint scream, quickly muffled, followed by the sound of scuffling feet. He pressed forward, vengeance drawn and held low. Deep inside the passage, Serpenta had cornered Lyra. The small band of survivors was huddled against a wall, paralyzed by fear. Riven, one of the assassins, was already securing a few of the children with silk restraints, his face a mask of predatory boredom. Slick stood guard, his crossbow aimed at the group. Lyra, despite her terror, had managed to climb the unstable pile of debris. She was poised to throw a heavy, jagged stone at Serpenta, who was quickly closing the distance. "Drop it, human," Serpenta hissed, her eyes gleaming in the dark. "You can't fight fate. You belong to the queen now. I belong to no one." Lyra screamed, throwing the stone with all her might. Serpenta reacted with blinding speed, deflecting the stone with a dagger. But the force and weight of the projectile, coupled with the instability of the debris pile, was enough. The pile shifted violently. Just as the earth began to groan and slide, Elias erupted from the darkness. He didn't announce his arrival. He attacked Slick, the guard nearest the entrance. Elias's speed in the tight space was terrifying. Slick barely had time to turn his crossbow before vengeance sliced through his throat in a clean, silent arc. Slick collapsed without a sound, his blood quickly soaking into the damp stone floor. Serpenta froze, her attention instantly drawn away from Lyra. She saw a flash of movement. The Shadow Walker had arrived. "Elias." Serpenta spat his name, recognizing the speed and the lethal aura instantly. "You abandoned your battle for this pathetic rabble?" "They are the reason for the battle," Elias said, his voice cold and flat, echoing strangely in the narrow tunnel. He ignored Riven for a second, focusing entirely on Serpenta. He knew she was the most dangerous. Riven, seeing his chance, lunged at Elias from the side, dagger aimed at his kidney. Elias moved not to fight Riven but to use him. As Riven approached, Elias pivoted, catching Riven's wrist and throwing the assassin hard against Serpenta. The impact momentarily stunned them both in the confined space. "The queen wants you alive, Matriarch's Viper," Elias said, pressing his advantage. "I will settle for maimed." Elias plunged vengeance not at Serpenta's body, but into the floor between her legs, twisting the blade and using the leverage to destabilize the already shaky ground beneath the assassin. The tunnel floor, weakened by the previous collision and the impact of the stone, gave way with a deafening, grinding roar. Serpenta screamed as the stone beneath her feet vanished. A deep fissure opened, leading into a dark, bottomless shaft, a natural chasm within the mountain. Riven, tangled with Serpenta, was pulled down with her. Elias did not pause to watch them fall. He knew the depths of the mountain would silence even the queen's elite assassins. He immediately turned his attention to the terrified survivors. "Now, the cave is collapsing." The sound of falling rock and dust was overwhelming. Lyra, shocked but quick-thinking, grabbed the nearest child and helped push the survivors deeper into the passage, towards the known exit. Elias stood at the edge of the widening chasm, using his body as a shield. He brought vengeance down onto a large, loose slab of rock, splitting it in half and sending the pieces crashing down the void, sealing the path Serpenta and her crew had taken. He had saved them, but at a terrible cost. The path back to the monastery was now impassable, and Lord Forlag was free to consolidate his forces. Hours later, as the first gray light of dawn touched the mountain peaks, Elias and the survivors emerged from the far side of the path of silent sighs. They were miles from the monastery high in the northern foothills, looking down upon the sprawling walled city of Atheria, the last human bastion. Lyra looked back at the mountain, then at Elias, who was leaning heavily against a rock, his body bruised and exhausted. "The assassins, are they gone?" Lyra asked, her voice raspy. "They are buried," Elias confirmed, sheathing vengeance. "But Seraphina sent 2 threats. The first has failed. The second is about to succeed." He pointed down towards the valley. The sight was catastrophic. Below them, on the plains outside Atheria's fortified walls, was a moving sea of armor and banners. Seraphina's main army had not waited. They had marched immediately after her retreat from the monastery. Their ranks were endless, their siege engines enormous, and they were already beginning to set up their lines. The city was surrounded. And leading the central, most powerful column, having recovered from his injury, was General Kalen, flanked by the remaining winged sentinels. The siege was underway. "We bought them a night," Lyra, Elias said, his eyes hard, his weariness forgotten. "But Seraphina played us. She knew the monastery was a distraction. She sacrificed Forlag and the assassins just to secure her main objective." Lyra stared at the overwhelming force. "The city? They won't stand a chance against that many. What do we do now? We're just a handful of villagers." Elias looked at the city, then at the sword in his hand. "We do what we were meant to do. We enter the city and we prepare for the siege. Seraphina wanted to dissolve hope. We are going to become it." He turned to Lyra. "I need you, Lyra. You know the tunnels and supply routes of this region. The city's wall will hold, but only if they have someone coordinating the defense from the inside. I will fight the monsters outside. You will fight the fear inside. But you are just one man, Elias. How can you fight an army?" Lyra pleaded. Elias looked back at the mountain, a deep, bitter resolve settling on his face. "I don't have to beat her army, Lyra. I just have to draw her out. The debt is not paid until Seraphina herself faces the consequences of her choices. She will not stop until she has me. We use that." Elias, followed by Lyra and the handful of survivors, began the final desperate descent towards the city gates. The true siege, the final confrontation between the Crimson Matriarch and the Shadow Walker, was about to begin. Elias and the survivors, Lyra among them, slipped through the subterranean supply tunnels and into Atheria just as the massive iron gates were being sealed shut. The city, normally a vibrant hub of human civilization, was now a cauldron of panicked activity. Guards scrambled onto the parapets, engineers prepared the defenses, and citizens hoarded supplies, their faces etched with the cold certainty of doom. Atheria was commanded by Lord Aldrich, an old warrior with a reputation for both stubbornness and strategic brilliance. Elias found him in the central war room, hunched over a huge tactical map, surrounded by worried captains. Aldrich looked up at the sight of the weary, blood-splattered figure of Elias, whom he immediately recognized from old legends, the ghost of the Silent Blade Order. "The Shadow Walker," Aldrich said, his voice flat. "The legends say you died years ago." "Legends are flexible, Lord Aldrich," Elias replied, walking straight to the map. He pointed to the thickest part of the vampire host. "The Queen is here. Her vanguard is led by General Kalen. They are not probing, they are settling in for a decisive siege. Their goal is to crush the city's spirit before they breach the walls." Aldrich sighed heavily. "We knew they were coming, but not this fast. We have 200 skilled archers, 4,000 conscripts, and walls that haven't been tested in 2 centuries. We are outnumbered 10 to 1. The numbers don't matter on the walls, only at the breach," Elias countered, his eyes scanning the defenses. "Your walls are strong, but Kalen will look for a weakness, the old Western Foundry Gate. The hinges are rusted. He will attack there first, probably by dawn." He turned to Lyra. "Lyra, you know the lower city and the old smuggling routes. You will work with the supply masters. Keep the defenders fed, tend to the wounded, and most importantly, use those routes to move reinforcements quickly and unseen to wherever the main assault hits." Lyra, though intimidated by the sudden responsibility, nodded firmly. "I understand. I will keep the heart of the city beating, Elias." Elias then looked at Lord Aldrich. "My task is simple, to make this siege cost more than Seraphina is willing to pay. Give me access to the outer defensive towers. I will start tonight. I will be your shadow on the field, cutting their lines of supply and crippling their siege engines." Aldrich looked at the exhausted human, then at his captains. His face slowly hardened into a grim resolve. "You may be the last of your kind, Shadow Walker, but you are the only hope we have left. The western towers are yours. May the light of your blade never dim." As night fell, the siege began in earnest. The vampires launched a steady, demoralizing barrage of fire arrows and dark magic against the city walls. But the most effective attacks were taking place outside the walls in the darkness. Elias began his one-man war. Using the concealed firing slots and blind spots of the outer towers, he slipped outside the city. He moved through the enemy lines like a silent, lethal contagion. He wasn't focused on killing thousands, he was focused on disruption. First, he targeted the vampire engineers setting up the heavy catapults. A blur of movement, a whisper of vengeance, and the engineer would fall, his throat neatly severed. Without their precise guidance, the catapults fired wildly, wasting precious ammunition and resources. Next, he targeted the supply lines. He located small caravans bringing fresh blood supplies and war material from the Vraden camp. He decimated these groups, leaving their wagons burning and their cargo ruined, forcing the main vampire camp to spread its resources thinner to protect its infrastructure. General Kalen, recovering quickly from Elias's earlier attack, was coordinating the siege and watching the chaos unfold on the periphery. Reports flooded his command tent. 3 siege engines damaged, cause unknown. The Southern Blood convoy failed to arrive, found empty. Patrols are disappearing silently on the outer perimeter. Kalen slammed his fist onto the campaign table. It's him. The Shadow Walker. He fights like a ghost. He's not attacking the main force. He's bleeding us through 1,000 small cuts. He understood Elias's tactic. The human was raising the cost of the siege dramatically, exploiting the vastness of the vampire army's perimeter. The next afternoon, Queen Seraphina arrived at the siege lines, flying directly from Castle Vraden. She landed on a temporary watchtower, her massive wings casting a pall over the camp. Her eyes, still bearing the cold fury from her initial confrontation with Elias, surveyed the city and the troubled command post. General Kalen. She thundered, her voice slicing through the camp noise. Explain to me why a single human is crippling my siege. I saw this man fight. You should have deployed an entire unit to eliminate him immediately. Kalen knelt, his face pale with shame. My queen, we have deployed units. They vanish. He is not fighting conventionally. He uses the darkness and the terrain. He is too fast for our heavy armored troops and too silent for our trackers. He is striking our weak points with surgical precision. Seraphina stared at the defiant walls of Atheria, then towards the shadows where Elias was known to operate. She had intended this siege to be swift and glorious, a perfect psychological victory. Instead, it was becoming a drawn-out, costly affair, a monument to the failure of her commanders and worse, a testament to the power of one man. The tales of Elias's exploits would spread like wildfire through the remaining human world. This ends now, Seraphina declared, her voice low and dangerous. The war is not against the city, Kalen. The war is against Elias. If the city dies, the hope remains. If Elias dies, the hope is extinguished, and Atheria will fall into despair. She turned to Kalen, her crimson eyes blazing. I will not waste my army. I will not allow this embarrassment to continue. I want every single available soldier to focus on one single task, trap the Shadow Walker. My queen? Kalen asked, astonished. To halt the siege for one man? He fights alone and he strikes from the shadows, Seraphina explained, a terrible smile spreading across her lips. He is methodical. He has patterns. He will target the western siege camp tonight. He must stop the breaching forces. We give him what he wants. We make a grand, glittering show of vulnerability at the western camp. We pull back the majority of the guards, leaving only a small, exposed unit and the most tempting target, the final breaching charge. He will come for it. She tapped her armored finger on the map, pointing exactly where Elias would strike. And when he commits, when he is focused on that critical target, I will be waiting. I want no other forces involved. I will prove to this pestilence that his legends are meaningless against true power. The duel he sought he shall have. But this time on my terms. Seraphina was setting a deadly, personal trap. The siege was paused, and the entire vampire war effort was now centered on the capture and execution of one man. The moon was high, hidden behind the permanent blood mist that seemed to follow Seraphina's army. The western camp of the siege line, as orchestrated by the queen, presented a tempting, critical target. A massive iron-reinforced breaching ram, designed to smash through the old foundry gate of Atheria, stood exposed. Around it, the guards were minimal, looking bored and overconfident. A bait too obvious to miss, yet too crucial to ignore. Elias, exhausted but driven, observed the scene from the shadows of a nearby rocky outcrop. He sensed the trap immediately. The exposed ram, the minimal guards, the unnatural silence in the rest of the camp, it all screamed artifice. Seraphina is waiting for me, he thought, gripping vengeance. She wants the spectacle. She wants to prove her power is absolute. But Elias knew he had no choice. Lord Aldrich had confirmed that the foundry gate's hinges would not withstand more than a few hours of consistent assault from a heavy ram. If this ram went unchallenged, Atheria would be breached by morning. The entire purpose of his mission, protecting the hope embodied by the survivors in the city, would fail. The debt demands this payment. He decided not to circumvent the trap, but to step into it on his own terms. He wouldn't sneak, he would be a spectacle himself. Elias sprinted out of the darkness and directly into the camp, a dark projectile aimed at the breaching ram. His sudden appearance caused immediate panic among the few visible guards. They scrambled to intercept him, but Elias was a blur of lethal purpose. He didn't waste time fighting. He vaulted over the first line of defense, ignoring the daggers and swords aimed at him. His target was the ram's mechanism. He reached the massive machine, and in a single devastating movement he plunged vengeance deep into the hydraulic piston system that powered the ram. The steel of his blade, consecrated with ancient anti-vampiric wards, met the machine's metal with a screeching sound. Elias twisted the blade violently, severing the piston rod and rendering the multi-ton weapon useless. The act was complete in less than 30 seconds. The moment the ram was crippled, the trap sprang shut. The small group of guards scattered, revealing a vast, open killing floor. And standing right where Elias had known she would be, atop a supply cart for better visibility, was Queen Seraphina. She was alone, her immense wings half-furled, her ruby eyes shining with cold triumph. Foolish, predictable human, Seraphina's voice resonated, amplified by dark magic. You walked right into your grave. Elias turned, facing her, his breathing heavy. The cost of his speed and exertion was catching up to him. I only walk where I need to be, Matriarch, Elias retorted, holding vengeance ready. The ram is broken. Your siege is delayed. You may kill me, but you won't kill my purpose. Seraphina descended, landing lightly on the ground 10 feet from him. Her aura of power was overwhelming, pressing down on Elias like a physical weight. Your purpose is meaningless. Your life is a fleeting shadow against my eternity. She roared, her control slipping into pure ancient rage. You scarred my armor. You defeated my general. You have made a mockery of my campaign. I will enjoy peeling your legend from your bones. She attacked instantly without posturing. It was not the defensive, testing movement of their first fight. This was the full, unbridled fury of a centuries-old vampire queen. She moved so fast that the eye registered only a streaking shadow. Elias met the blow, the shock of the impact radiating through his bones. Seraphina's speed was terrifying, but her fury made her predictable. She was attacking with raw, brute power, relying on her superiority. The duel became a terrifying ballet of metal and shadows. Seraphina pressed him back, her powerful sword raining down blows that would crush stone. Elias parried, focusing all his remaining strength not on meeting her force, but on deflecting it, seeking to exploit the slight openings her aggressive stance created. He managed to slip a counterattack past her guard, aiming for her exposed throat. But Seraphina reacted instantly, catching the flat of vengeance between her armored hands. The magical energy of the sword hissed as it met her power. Not this time, human. Seraphina laughed, her strength immense. She didn't let go of the blade. Instead, she used her phenomenal inhuman strength to twist the sword, forcing Elias to drop it or break his wrists. Elias fought back, gritting his teeth, but her strength was absolute. The moment came, his grip failed. Vengeance clattered onto the muddy ground, sliding away, leaving Elias unarmed. Seraphina smiled, a cruel, triumphant widening of her mouth that revealed her long, predatory fangs. There. Now you are just flesh, she whispered, grabbing Elias by the throat with one hand, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. She crushed his windpipe with ease, staring into his eyes as the light began to fade from them. Tell me, Shadow Walker, she purred, dragging the moment out, is this the light of hope or the silence of failure? Elias struggled, his feet kicking uselessly. He couldn't breathe. He had failed. The debt would never be fully paid. Inside Atheria, the news of Elias's move, crippling the ram, sent a brief wave of elation, quickly followed by terror when the silence returned. Lyra, tirelessly moving supplies through the tunnels, heard the whispers and saw the fear in the faces of the returning perimeter guards. They had seen the queen herself waiting. He's caught, she realized, her heart plunging. He sacrificed himself for the city. But Lyra, remembering Elias's cold resolve, his unwavering purpose, refused to surrender to despair. Elias had done his part, he had bought them time. Her job was to keep the hope alive as he had instructed. She rushed back to Lord Aldrich in the war room. Lord, Elias is caught. But he broke the ram. We have time. Use it. The Queen will parade his body to break our will. We have to make a move she doesn't expect. Aldrich, looking broken by the news of the Shadow Walker's capture, looked at the fiery young woman. What move, child? We are surrounded. The tunnels, Lord Aldrich. Lyra urged, pointing to the supply routes. They connect the city to the old northern watchtowers. The Queen assumes we're trapped and defending. We need to do the opposite. We need to send our best troops, not to fight Saraphina, but to hit her main reserve camp where she least expects it. A massive counter-raid right now, while she is distracted by her victory. Aldrich stared at the map, then at Lyra. It was a move of pure desperation and audacity, an act of faith in the dying seconds of the game. If it failed, the last of their meager fighting force would be gone. If it succeeded, it would force Saraphina to choose between her victory over Elias and the survival of her entire invasion force. Prepare the northern garrison. Aldrich barked, his eyes regaining their warrior's spark. Lyra, you will guide them. This city will not fall in silence. Back at the western camp, Saraphina was savoring the final seconds of her victory over Elias. His life was draining away, his movements slowing. Suddenly, a massive, brilliant flare of light erupted from the northern camp, followed by the terrifying sound of battle, the shouts of human soldiers and the screams of unprepared vampires. Saraphina's eyes shot wide open, her attention ripped from her triumph. The distraction was too big to ignore. It was an organized, coordinated counterattack, impossible for a besieged city. What is this folly? She screamed, her attention diverted for the smallest, crucial fraction of a second. That was all Elias needed. With the last remnants of his strength, and driven by the sight of the chaos Lyra and Aldrich had created, Elias performed a movement he had held in reserve, a core martial skill of the Silent Blade Order, the Ghost Shove. Focusing all his chi into his rigid legs and back, he shoved upward violently with his body. The sudden, brutal upward jerk, coupled with Saraphina's distracted grip, was enough to break her hold. Elias dropped, barely conscious, gasping for air. Saraphina, furious and disoriented by the northern attack, barely noticed his fall. She turned to face the distant noise, already preparing to fly to the threat. Elias clawed his way to his fallen sword, Vengeance. He grabbed the hilt, pulling himself up, leaning heavily on the blade. You chose wrong, Matriarch, Elias rasped, his throat crushed, his voice barely a whisper. You chose vanity over victory. Now you pay. Saraphina turned back, her face contorted in disbelief and rage. Before she could react, Elias made his final, most desperate move. He did not run. He did not fight. He raised Vengeance and with the absolute last burst of his energy, he brought the blade down, not at her, but at the ground between them. The consecrated metal struck the earth, releasing a silent, concussive wave of anti-vampiric energy. The force wasn't physically damaging to Saraphina, but it was spiritually crippling. The energy backlash caused her ancient vampire senses to overload, forcing her to involuntarily recoil, clutching her head in agony. The Queen was momentarily stunned, her power flickering. Elias used this flicker to his advantage. He turned and ran not back to the city but away from the city, deeper into the wilderness. He was wounded, broken and running on fumes, but he was alive. Saraphina shrieked in frustration. She had to choose, pursue the wounded human and finish the job or save her army, which was being ripped apart by Aldrich and Lyra's sudden counterattack. With a final desperate look at the vanishing Elias, Saraphina made her choice. She let out a deafening, sonic command, and launched herself towards the burning northern camp to rally her troops. The Shadow Walker had escaped, crippled the siege, and forced the Crimson Matriarch to choose her army over her personal vengeance. The debt was not settled, but the hope of Atheria had been saved. Elias ran for the remainder of the night and half of the following day, fueled only by the fading adrenaline and a singular will to survive. He was severely injured. His ribs were cracked, his throat was bruised black from Saraphina's crushing grip, and every movement sent blinding flares of pain through his body. He was running not towards safety, but towards an ancient, forgotten place known only to the Order of the Silent Blade, a hermitage high in the secluded, hostile peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Range. He barely made it. Collapsing inside the small, carved cave dwelling, Elias fell into a fevered, near-death state. His body, pushed beyond its limits, had finally begun to fail. However, the hermitage held secrets. The cave was not just a shelter, it was a center of concentrated natural energy, imbued with the ancient protective wards of the Silent Blade. For days Elias lay unconscious. The cave's cold, raw magic, which flowed through veins of pure silver deep in the rock, began its work. The process was agonizingly slow, a merging of physical and spiritual healing. The anti-vampiric energy that charged his blade, vengeance, now subtly infused his own system, not making him immortal, but accelerating his mortal healing dramatically. During his fevered recovery, his mind was dominated by one recurring image: Liana, his lost love, pinned by the crucifix. The debt remained unpaid. But now, another image surfaced, Lyra's fierce eyes as she led the counter-raid. He had saved the spirit of hope, proving that Liana's sacrifice was not meaningless. This realization, coupled with the strange energy of the hermitage, solidified his new purpose. Not just vengeance, but the survival of the idea of humanity. He knew he couldn't return to Atheria yet. He needed to be whole, and more importantly, he needed to give Saraphina time to overcommit to her next, undoubtedly reckless, move. Inside the walls of Atheria, the mood was one of shocked survival. Lord Aldrich's audacious counter-raid, guided by Lyra, had been devastatingly effective, forcing General Kalen to pull his forces back from the wall to defend the vulnerable northern camp. The siege was broken for now. Lord Aldrich, impressed and recognizing the unique value of the young woman, immediately promoted Lyra. She was no longer just a survivor, she was the chief of internal logistics and intelligence. Lyra excelled. She used her knowledge of the tunnels and her raw, emotional connection to the common people to reorganize the city's defensive efforts. While the captains focused on the walls, Lyra focused on the city's heart. Morale. She toured the hidden camps, ensuring the survivors and citizens knew that Elias was alive and that they had been the key to the victory. Hope, fueled by their own actions, became a tangible force. Logistics. She mapped out the city's resources, creating an underground network for quick supply delivery and troop movement, exactly as Elias had instructed. Her intelligence. She established a network of young scouts, using the ancient signal methods of the riverbend villages to monitor the movements of the retreating vampire forces. Lyra's sudden rise caused political friction. Many of the old, noble families and entrenched captains resented the rapid promotion of a common refugee. They saw her as a dangerous upstart. Lord Aldrich, however, protected her fiercely, knowing that Lyra's fire was the only thing standing between the city and collapse. "The Shadow Walker bought us time, Lyra," Aldrich told her one evening. "But the Queen will be back. And she will not make the same mistake." Back at Castle Vraden, Queen Seraphina was consumed by a cold, incandescent rage. The failure of her siege, the destruction of her breaching ram, and the escape of Elias, all due to the audacity of a single human, was an unforgivable humiliation. She had lost face, and her authority was momentarily questioned even by the highest ranks of her court. General Kalen reported that Lord Forlag, though alive, was crippled and useless. The Blood Court assassins were dead. Seraphina's most aggressive lieutenants had failed. "The human is not merely a warrior," Kalen, Seraphina hissed, pacing her throne room. "He is a catalyst. He turns fear into defiance. If I crush the city, he will lead a resistance for centuries. The solution is not brute force, it is erosion." Seraphina unveiled her new plan, one that was far more insidious and cruel than a simple siege. She called it the Venom of Trust operation. The Shadow Walker lives because the people believe in him. He trusts the city will hold. He trusts his little refugee girl will keep order, Seraphina explained, a terrible calm settling over her features. Step 1, the lure. Seraphina knew Elias was wounded and hiding. She would make an overt display of weakness. She ordered Kalen to pull back most of the vampire army, leaving only a small, heavily fortified garrison miles away from Atheria. This would give the city a false sense of security, encouraging Elias to believe he had won a decisive victory. Step 2, the seed of doubt. Seraphina dispatched a new specialized damper agent, a master of manipulation and disguise named Mistress Ilara. Ilara's mission was not to fight, but to infiltrate Atheria's power structure. She would use the existing resentment against Lyra and the war-weary paranoia of the noble families. Ilara will plant the seed, Kalen, Seraphina declared. She will spread the rumor that Lyra is a double agent, a gift from Elias to confuse their defense. She will point to Lyra's impossible rise, her quick command of the tunnels, and the fact that Elias only appeared after she arrived. She will turn their hope into suspicion. And suspicion always breeds fear. Step 3. The internal collapse. Seraphina's ultimate goal was to force Lord Aldrich to choose between his trust in Lyra and the stability of his command. If Lyra is discredited and arrested, the city's internal organization, its logistics, its morale, its hope, will collapse. When the city turns on itself, when the hope Elias fought for is poisoned from within, Seraphina concluded, a triumphant gleam in her eyes, that is when we return. Elias will be forced to rush back to save Lyra, desperate and alone, and this time he will be walking into a city that is hostile to him, not a mere trap, but a cage built by human fear itself. The stage was set for a political war. Elias was recuperating, unaware that the human world he fought for was about to turn against the very symbol of hope he had protected, Lyra. Following Seraphina's withdrawal, a deceptive calm settled over the plains surrounding Atheria. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, attributing the success to their own courage and Elias's sacrifice. Within this false security, Mistress Lyra, the damper master of disguise, executed step 2 of Seraphina's venom of trust operation. Lyra was not a warrior, she was a predator of the mind. She entered Atheria disguised as a Lady Serena, a noble woman from the outskirts who claimed to have escaped the last-minute retreat of the vampire forces, carrying vital, though seemingly useless, intelligence. Her cover was flawless. She carried genuine documents, spoke with the right accent, and played the part of a traumatized but resourceful survivor perfectly. She quickly gained access to the upper circles of the city's paranoid, relief-drunk society. The initial target was not Lyra directly, but the Council of Noble Elders, a group already simmering with resentment over Lord Aldrich's decisive wartime authority, and specifically, his trust in the low-born Lyra. Lyra was a master of the whispered insinuation. She started not with accusations but with observations. The impossible coincidence. In private meetings with Elder Varian, the most vocal critic of Aldrich, Lyra would casually mention, "It is quite extraordinary, isn't it? The Shadow Walker appears only after Lyra arrives from the Riverbend ruins. He saves her people and then he comes to save us. A perfectly coordinated rescue. It almost feels staged." The unseen routes. To Captain Torvin, who resented Lyra's command over the logistic tunnels, Lyra would observe, "How does a simple refugee know the ancient smuggling tunnels better than your city engineers?" It's almost as if she was given the maps, perhaps by an outside agency with a vested interest in the city's internal defense. The hidden agenda, the final, crucial poison was introduced. Perhaps the Queen isn't so foolish. Perhaps she didn't lose control of the Shadow Walker. Perhaps the Shadow Walker and his suspiciously talented friend, Lyra, were deliberately released to ensure the city survives enough to be easily captured later, under compromised leadership. These whispers, backed by Lyra's polished, noble facade, found fertile ground in the exhausted paranoia of the elders. The very strength Lyra exhibited, her quick thinking and knowledge of the terrain, was twisted into evidence of betrayal. Lyra, focused intensely on reinforcing the city's core, was oblivious to the subtle, deadly campaign being waged against her in the council rooms. Her strength lay in action, not court politics. Her focus was on a critical project, fortifying the western barracks. This area, exposed during the recent attack, needed immediate shoring up of supplies and a new contingent of guards. She ordered the reallocation of crucial grain stores and armed conscripts, citing urgent security concerns. It was this perfectly sound strategic move that Mistress Lyra used to launch her direct attack. At a tense council meeting, Elder Varian, fueled by Lyra's constant insinuations, finally exploded. "Lord Aldrich, this is sheer madness. The grain stores must remain in the central vaults. They are the most secure. And the conscripts are needed to guard the main gates. This refugee, this Lyra, is demanding we move vital supplies to the least defensible part of the city. We cannot allow this reckless command." Aldrich defended Lyra fiercely. "Her logistics saved us, Varian. She exposed the weakness. We trust her judgment." Lyra, as Lady Serena, spoke up then, her voice soft and full of concerned reason, cutting through the anger. "Forgive me, my lords, for speaking out of turn. But Elder Varian raises a chilling point. If this western barracks is so vulnerable, why would a loyal commander move the most vital supplies directly into the jaws of the enemy? Unless, of course, the plan is to simply lose those supplies when the attack inevitably returns. Such a loss would cripple the city from within." The logic was simple, terrifying, and deeply flawed, but it exploited the nobles' deep-seated fear of treachery. The captains, seeing the logic, wavered. They had respected Lyra's actions, but they understood the language of military hierarchy and tradition. Captain Torvin stepped forward. Lord Aldrich, Torvin said gravely, with all respect to the refugees' efforts, we cannot risk the city's main food source on a suspicion. Her command must be challenged. Until we verify her loyalty, the grain stays in the central vault. The council voted. Despite Aldrich's passionate defense, the resolution passed. Lyra was officially stripped of her logistical command over central supplies. She was relegated back to only managing the movement of the surviving refugees, a political demotion designed to isolate her. Lyra, standing in the back of the room, felt a cold dread sink in. It wasn't the demotion that hurt, it was the realization that the vampires were winning without firing a single arrow. Seraphina had found the true weakness of humanity, its capacity for self-destruction through fear and distrust. Her last remaining ally, Lord Aldrich, pulled her aside. This is political gamesmanship, Lyra. You still have the tunnels. They cannot take that from you. They have done worse, my lord, Lyra whispered, her voice laced with pain. They have isolated me. If the Queen attacks now, the internal chaos will be catastrophic. They are breaking the hope that Elias fought for. Lyra knew the moment was ripe for the return of the Shadow Walker. He needed to know that the battlefield had shifted from stone walls to the poison mines of the council. High in the hermitage, Elias finally awoke. The strange, silver-laced energy had done its work. The bones were healed, the bruises faded, and the strength was returning, not just to his body but to his very essence. He felt different, harder, faster, the silver energy within him now resonating subtly with vengeance. But as he sat, meditating on the debt, a single clear vision pierced his mind. Lyra standing alone, surrounded not by enemies but by accusing human faces. The sight was more alarming than facing Seraphina's blade. He knew then that Seraphina's strategy had shifted. The silence from the plains wasn't a truce, it was a distraction. His purpose was calling him back, but this time the enemy was already inside the gate. Elias donned his leather armor, the silent sentinel of the silent blade. He picked up vengeance, which felt lighter and more responsive than ever. He had recovered, but he was returning to a city that was sick with doubt, a city that might now view the hero he saved, Lyra, as a villain. He started his descent immediately, knowing he was running out of time before the political rot became irreversible. Elias used the same subterranean supply tunnels that Lyra had guided her people through weeks earlier. The tunnels were now known to the city's defenses, but Elias knew the secret, smaller fissures, the ancient air vents and inspection shafts of the Silent Blade Order, that allowed for completely unseen entry. He emerged not into the war room but into the deep, dark underbelly of the city, near the old granaries. The silence in the lower city was different from the silence of the siege. It was heavy, suspicious, and full of whispers. He saw guards patrolling in pairs, their eyes darting nervously, not outwards towards the vampire plains, but inwards towards the shadows. The city felt paranoid, a sickness that Seraphina had engineered perfectly. He moved towards the main logistics hub, the area where he knew Lyra would still be tirelessly working, despite her demotion. He found her in a cramped, candlelit office, hunched over salvaged maps and rationing charts, her red hair tied back, her brow furrowed with exhaustion and worry. Lyra looked up, startled by the presence, but her fear instantly melted into a massive wave of relief. Elias, she whispered, jumping up. You're alive. They said the Queen had you, that you were dead. I am alive, Elias confirmed, his voice rough and low due to his recovering throat. He quickly checked her for injuries. Your counter-raid saved the city, Lyra. It bought us weeks. Lyra shook her head, her relief quickly replaced by grimness. You bought us time to break ourselves, Elias. The Queen's forces are gone, but her venom is here. They've turned on me. They stripped my command. The elders, and a new lady who arrived during the chaos, Lady Serena, are feeding the city fear and doubt. They think I'm a spy. Lady Serena, Elias repeated, the name flat on his lips. Seraphina always favors the knife in the back. A master manipulator. A damper, perhaps. They are the only ones subtle enough to fool an entire council. She's subtle but not entirely harmless, Lyra insisted. She's been pushing to move all the remaining grain into the old Western Barracks storehouses, the exact area you crippled the ram. She says it's for dispersal safety, but it makes no sense logistically. Elias's eyes narrowed. It makes perfect sense. They want the supplies moved to the weakest point so they can be easily captured. And if you object, they confirm your treachery. It's a perfect trap designed to isolate you and starve the city simultaneously. He looked at Lyra, a new plan already forming. I need to know everything about this Lady Serena. Her movements, her connections, the vulnerabilities of the elders she's manipulating. We can't fight the entire political structure, but we can cut the head off the snake. The opportunity came the following afternoon. Lady Serena, Mistress Lyra, elegant and impeccably dressed, was making a calculated appearance in the main training courtyard, offering comfort and strategic advice to the weary captains, a display of loyalty and competence designed to solidify her standing. Elias, still avoiding public attention, watched from the dark balcony overlooking the courtyard. He saw the way she carried herself, too composed, too beautiful, her eyes holding an unnerving, calculating stillness. Definitely a damper. He waited until she was momentarily separated from her small entourage of admiring nobles. He dropped silently from the balcony, landing perfectly behind a stack of crates, and then glided into the light, moving directly toward her. Lyra was in mid-conversation with Captain Torvin, subtly asking leading questions about Lord Aldrich's judgment. Suddenly, a figure appeared before her, a tall, weary man in dark leather, his heavy sword Vengeance resting on his shoulder, his eyes cold and ancient. The courtyard went dead silent. The appearance of the Shadow Walker, whom half the city believed dead, was electrifying. Lyra, the master of deceit, barely flinched. Her reaction was instantaneous and masterful. She didn't show fear, only concern. "The brave warrior has returned," Lyra exclaimed, taking a graceful step back, her hands clasped. "We heard terrible things, sir. We thought you lost. Atheria owes you a debt it can never repay." Elias ignored her false piety. He stopped 5 feet away, his presence radiating pure, focused hostility. His voice was rough but commanding. "Lady Serena. Or should I call you Mistress Lyra?" Elias's rough voice cut through the silence. Lyra's facade wavered for a microsecond, a flicker of pure, animalistic surprise in her eyes, instantly suppressed. No one in the human world should have known that name. She composed herself instantly, forcing a puzzled smile. "I'm afraid I don't know that name, brave warrior. Are you feeling well? Perhaps the wounds are still fresh." "My wounds are healing, damper," Elias countered, his tone dangerously low. "But the city's wound is you. I faced the Queen's sword and I survived. I know her scent. You carry it, Lyra. The scent of calculated cruelty." She tried to turn the situation to her advantage, using the audience of captains and nobles gathering around them. "Captain Torvin, do you hear this? The hero is delirious. Perhaps the strain of his fighting has broken his mind. He is accusing a loyal survivor of being a demon. Lord Aldrich must be informed of this erratic behavior immediately." "You prey on fear," Elias stated, taking a slow step closer, the massive blade of vengeance scraping lightly on the stone. "You turn courage into suspicion. You will not succeed. The hope you tried to poison is stronger than your whispers." Lyra, realizing the sheer force of his moral conviction and the danger of his physical presence, finally decided to retreat. She knew she couldn't outfight him, and a public confrontation where her composure slipped would ruin her delicate work. A sad end to a hero's tale, Lyra sighed dramatically, backing away towards her entourage. "I will pray for your sanity, warrior. But for the city's safety, I must inform the council of this irrational outburst." She turned and left, a picture of wounded dignity, but as she disappeared through the archway, her eyes locked with Elias's for a second. In that brief, silent exchange she sent a message. "The fight is political and you cannot win on this battlefield." Elias and Lyra met again that night. The verbal sparring had bought them some time, but it had also solidified Lyra's next move. She would use Elias's irrational outburst to discredit him and Lyra, and then she would go for the high-value target, Lord Aldrich. "She's going to frame him," Elias, Lyra deduced, tracing a line on the map. "Aldrich is the only one standing in her way. She needs his authority to fully isolate me and move the supplies." "Oh," Elias asked. "Aldrich is too strong, too respected. She's focused on the master key to the central vault," Lyra explained. "Only Aldrich carries it. If that key were to be found in the possession of one of her enemies, say one of the refugees I brought or perhaps even you, it would prove a conspiracy against the city's safety, and Aldrich would be forced to resign under suspicion of incompetence or worse, treason." Elias knew the clock was ticking. He had to expose Lyra before she struck, but a frontal assault on her reputation would only feed her narrative. He needed proof. "Show me the path to the central vault, Lyra," Elias commanded. "If she is planning a frame-up, she will need to be near that area to plant the evidence. I will be waiting for her." The next move in Seraphina's deadly game was not a siege, but a theft a targeted political assassination that would crumble Atheria from within. The central granary vault was the heart of Atheria's survival. It contained the city's last reserves of cured meat, dried grain, and medicinal herbs. Lord Aldrich trusted no one with its security. The massive iron-bound door could only be opened with the master key, which he kept chained to his belt at all times. Mistress Lyra, Lady Serena, had calculated her move with cold precision. She knew that simply assassinating Aldrich would cause uproar and martyrdom. She needed to discredit him utterly, proving he was part of Lyra's conspiracy to sabotage the city's supplies. Her plan was to first pickpocket the master key from Aldrich while he slept, a damper skill of unparalleled stealth. Then, using a small, specially trained ghoul smuggled into the city's underbelly, she would open the vault, steal a small but noticeable amount of high-value supplies, like rare medicines, and plant the master key on a refugee loyal to Lyra. The resulting panic and betrayal would crush Lyra's support and force Aldrich's immediate execution for treason. Elias and Lyra understood the urgency. Elias, knowing the layout of the city's undertunnels from Lyra's maps, established an ambush point near the vault's entrance, a hidden maintenance shaft known only to the original builders. That night, Elias waited in the absolute darkness of the maintenance shaft, vengeance sheathed but ready. His senses were stretched thin, listening for the unnatural silence of the damper. Around 2 a.m., the silence was pierced by the almost imperceptible sound of an expertly opened lock, the outer door to the vault's antechamber. Lyra had succeeded. She had already retrieved the key from the sleeping Aldrich and had rendezvoused with her accomplice. Elias heard the soft, slithering sound of the ghoul moving the lock mechanism on the main vault door. The ghoul, small and skeletal, was adept at manipulating complex locks. Lyra stood guard, her back to Elias's position, radiating smug confidence. This is the moment, Elias thought. If he attacked Lyra now, the ghoul would escape and the political damage would still be done. He had to capture both and the evidence. As the ghoul finally clicked the massive lock open, Lyra let out a low, satisfied hiss. Good work, little pest. Now retrieve the medicines and be quick. We framed the red-haired bitch before dawn. The ghoul moved to enter the vault. This was Elias's chance. Elias burst from the maintenance shaft, moving with explosive speed and a low growl from his still raw throat. He didn't use vengeance. He tackled Lyra hard, driving his armored shoulder into her back. The impact sent the damper crashing into the stone wall. The ghoul, startled, turned to attack, its claws extended. Elias kicked the ghoul once hard, sending it reeling back into the open vault door. Lyra recovered instantly. She was fast, but Elias was driven by purpose. She didn't fight with a sword, she fought with poisoned daggers, pulling 2 razor-thin blades from her sleeves. You persistent shadow. Lyra spat, dropping the pretense of Lady Serena entirely, her eyes glowing yellow in the dim light. You ruin everything. Elias deflected her first 2 dagger thrusts with his gauntlets, ignoring the painful scrape of the poisoned metal. He wrestled her arms, focusing not on killing her but on immobilizing her. He needed her alive for the proof. Lyra was slippery and desperate. She used a classic damper maneuver, attempting to kick off the wall and twist free. Elias anticipated the move, slamming her back against the wall a second time, pinning her arms. The game is over, Lyra, Elias rasped, his eyes burning with cold triumph. Before she could fight free, he used the iron chains he wore on his belt, wrapping them around her arms and torso, binding her tightly to the wall. The cold iron of the human-forged chain was not just physically restrictive, it was spiritually painful to the damper, neutralizing her speed and strength. The ghoul, recovering from the kick, attempted to flee into the tunnel system. Elias pulled vengeance and hurled it, not at the creature but into the iron-plated door. The massive sword lodged itself in the stone archway, blocking the creature's only escape path. The ghoul shrieked in frustration, trapped. The sound of the struggle was enough. Within minutes, Lord Aldrich, alerted by the unusual sounds from the vault, arrived with his honor guard, panting and confused. He found Elias, grim and bruised, standing guard over a bound, furious damper agent and a trapped ghoul. Aldrich stared at the elegant figure struggling against the iron chains. Lady Serena, what is the meaning of this madness? Elias walked over to the struggling ghoul. He reached down and retrieved a small sack the ghoul had dropped when it was kicked. Inside were several vials of expensive medicine and a heavy, familiar master key. Elias presented the evidence to Aldrich. The meaning, my lord, is that the queen is not attacking your walls. She is attacking your trust. This is Mistress Lyra, a damper spy. She stole your key intended to frame Lyra and destroy your reputation, causing internal chaos and surrender. Aldrich looked from the key to the thief in damper form and back to Elias. The pieces clicked into place. The sudden demotion of Lyra, the illogical demand to move supplies, Ilara's constant insinuations against Lyra. His own shame for doubting the young woman was palpable. Guards, arrest this creature immediately. Aldrich roared, his face white with fury and betrayal. Ilara, knowing her mission was a catastrophic failure, made one final attempt to poison the well. She smiled, a wicked, cold expression. You fools. You trust this Shadow Walker? He is the one who let me in. He's been gone for weeks and suddenly returns to the exact moment I'm cornered? He is an accomplice. He saved Lyra from the Queen just to save her from me. You are blind, old man. The guards wavered. Her lie was designed to exploit their deep-seated paranoia. Elias stepped forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ribs. He looked at Aldrich not with accusation but with a weary plea for trust. I fought the Queen face to face, my lord. I saved your city. I paid my debt, Elias said, his voice raspy. But she has shown us that our true enemy is not her sword, but the fear in our own hearts. Do not let her win now. Aldrich looked at the bound damper, then at the exhausted human who had risked his life twice for their cause, and finally at the master key clutched in his hand. He made his decision. Take this creature to the deepest dungeon. Hold her for immediate interrogation. Aldrich commanded. The Shadow Walker has spoken the truth. The city will not be crippled by internal dissent. The guards, relieved to finally have a clear enemy, dragged the struggling Ilara away, her muffled curses echoing in the chamber. The ghoul was quickly dispatched. The political war was over. Elias had won the city's trust and Lyra was vindicated. Word reached Queen Seraphina at her temporary command post. Her most brilliant and subtle plan, the venom of trust, had been utterly destroyed by the singular action of Elias. The humiliation was complete. She crushed the obsidian goblet she was holding, shards of black glass scattering across the floor. Enough. She shrieked, her rage finally erupting into an earthquake of pure power. No more games. No more subtlety. This human thinks he can defeat me with traps and politics? He thinks my power is limited to a mere siege? Seraphina stood, her vast, powerful wings stretching out to their full span, blocking out the light. I was wrong about the Shadow Walker. He is not a legend. He is a threat to the foundation of my existence. Killen. Gather every available force. Forget the siege lines. We will not wait. I will fly to Atheria myself, and I will tear down their walls stone by stone. And when I find Elias, I will not simply kill him. I will wipe his soul from this world. The final, decisive battle was set. Seraphina, driven by personal fury, was abandoning strategy for brute, overwhelming, total war. Elias was ready, but he knew this was his final, fatal stand. Queen Seraphina's rage was a physical phenomenon. She didn't wait for her army, she flew. Her vast, scaled wings beat the air above Atheria, creating a deafening sonic boom that shattered the glass in the city's highest windows. Her voice, amplified by pure, unfiltered ancient power, rolled over the city like thunder. Elias, you have embarrassed me for the last time. Surrender yourself now or I will tear this city apart, starting with the roof over Lyra's head. The fear that had simmered in Atheria's heart erupted into mass panic. Citizens ran for shelter, but the paralyzing effect of Seraphina's fury was total. Inside the war room, Lord Aldrich watched the skies with grim resolve. She is unstable. She is attacking alone. This is our only chance. The walls cannot withstand her full power. Elias stood ready. He was still injured, but the silver energy from the hermitage had left him unnaturally focused. He knew Seraphina's fury was the key to his final plan. He wasn't trying to beat her in a fair fight. He was trying to use her immortality against her. The dead is now, Elias whispered, sheathing vengeance. He climbed the highest defensive tower, exposing himself completely. Seraphina saw him. The sight of the lone, dark figure on the parapet caused her to halt her descent for a fraction of a second. She shrieked, a sound of absolute, joyous hatred, and plunged towards the tower. I have waited for this, human. Elias waited until the very last moment, then he leaped, not away from her but at her. He used the momentum of her descent and his own body weight, meeting her in midair above the city walls. It was not a fight, it was a collision. Elias did not use his sword. Instead, he locked his arms around her neck and torso, gripping her in a desperate, unbreakable embrace. The shock of his sudden, reckless proximity stunned Seraphina, who was prepared for a parry, not a tackle. "You don't get to run this time, Matriarch," Elias rasped, his arms like iron bands. Seraphina roared, thrashing wildly. Her wings beat furiously, carrying them higher, spinning through the sky. She slammed Elias against the nearest spire, trying to break his hold, but Elias's grip was absolute. He was using his body as a dead weight, clinging on with the resolve of the silent blade. "Like a worm. I will rip you limb from limb," Seraphina screamed. Elias held fast, speaking through gritted teeth. "I made a promise. The debt is paid here." Seraphina realized that Elias was not fighting to live. He was fighting to drag her down. She tried to use her speed to escape, but Elias's presence, coupled with the subtle anti-vampiric energy of the hermitage still clinging to him, was overwhelming her senses. She was losing control, flying erratically. Meanwhile, Lyra, watching from below, understood Elias's suicidal strategy. He was sacrificing his life to lure the queen away from the city and exhaust her. Lyra sprinted to the war room. "Lord Aldrich, Elias is drawing her away. We must use our heavy siege weapons. Not against the army but against them." Aldrich hesitated. "Lyra, we'll kill him too." "He knows that, my lord," Lyra cried, tears streaming down her face. "He is paying the debt. Focus all 4 northern catapults on the highest point. Wait for my signal." Back in the sky, Elias forced the struggle into a high, freezing altitude. Seraphina, desperate to escape his paralyzing grip, plunged back towards the ground, seeking to smash him against the stone. They crashed onto the open ground outside the city walls, near the wreckage of the breaching ram. Seraphina finally ripped Elias free, throwing him 10 feet away. He landed hard, his body bruised and broken. Seraphina stood over him, her chest heaving, her eyes burning. She raised her curved black sword for the final, definitive blow. "You chose death, Elias. Now bear witness to the price of defiance." Elias looked past her, towards the city walls, and saw Lyra standing on the highest parapet, holding aloft a massive, flaming torch. "The signal." Elias smiled faintly, a painful, victorious gesture. "It's not my defiance, Matriarch. It's ours." Before Seraphina could bring her sword down, the catapults launched. 4 massive, obsidian balls, not standard rock but heavy iron spheres wrapped in silver netting, flew in a high arc. They were aimed not at Seraphina, but at the exact spot where Elias had forced their crash landing. Seraphina, consumed by her hatred for Elias, saw the incoming projectiles only a second too late. She raised her hand to shield herself, recognizing the lethal payload. The first sphere struck her in the back with the force of a battering ram, the silver netting burning her ancient skin. The second and third struck the ground around her, detonating ancient, buried gunpowder caches that Elias had secretly laid during his nightly raids. The ground erupted in a massive, blinding explosion of fire and silver shrapnel. Elias was caught in the blast, the sound and force overwhelming his broken body. He felt his consciousness fading, his purpose achieved. When the smoke cleared, the sight was devastating. A massive crater smoked on the ground. Elias was nowhere to be seen, lost to the explosion. And at the center of the crater, Queen Seraphina was kneeling. She was horribly wounded. Her wings were shredded and burned, her armor was ripped open, and her skin, bleeding black blood, was covered in countless weeping wounds from the silver shrapnel. She was alive, but her immortality was severely compromised. Her power was broken. General Kalen, seeing the smoke and the immobilized queen, rushed forward with the remaining vanguard. "My queen! Retreat!" Kalen screamed, pulling Seraphina to her feet. Seraphina stumbled, her power reduced to a flicker. She looked at the crater where Elias had vanished, and then at the walls of Atheria. Her fury had been neutralized by the ultimate human sacrifice. She could not continue. "We retreat, Kalen," she whispered, her voice cracking with defeat. "We retreat, but the war is not over. The Shadow Walker paid the price. But I will collect the debt in the blood of his kin." The vampire army, seeing their queen wounded and their final desperate assault turned back, began their slow, miserable retreat towards Vraden. Atheria was saved. Lyra rushed out of the gates, accompanied by Aldrich, searching the smoking crater. They found only scorched earth and fragments of armor. Elias was gone, a phantom lost to the fire and the dust. Lyra found his sword, Vengeance, buried deep in the earth, its dark blade surprisingly intact, vibrating faintly with the silver energy. She pulled it out, the sword surprisingly light in her hands. The people of Atheria gathered on the walls, cheering. They had won. The siege of Atheria was broken. But Lyra stood by the crater holding the silent sword. She knew the victory was incomplete. Seraphina was wounded, not dead. The debt was only partially paid. Elias had died for their hope, but his purpose, to eliminate the queen, was left unfinished. Lyra, now holding the very symbol of his vengeance, looked toward the retreating vampire forces. She no longer saw herself as a refugee. She was the successor. The next Shadow Walker. The story of the vampire queen who ridiculed human legends had ended with her humiliation and near death, proving that even a single human warrior, armed with purpose and sacrifice, could cripple immortality. The silence that followed Seraphina's retreat was not peace, but a brittle calm. Atheria had won a catastrophic victory, saved by the audacious sacrifice of Elias. The city mourned the Shadow Walker, yet his legacy, vengeance, the long dark blade, now rested in the hands of Lyra. Lyra did not celebrate. She spent the next 2 weeks consumed by 2 tasks, burying the dead and training. She kept vengeance hidden, taking it only to the deepest, most secluded parts of the city's defense tunnels. Elias's fighting style was not about brute force, but cold, scientific efficiency, a mastery of movement and leverage. Lyra knew she would never possess Elias's strength, but she could master his focus. The silver energy that clung to the blade felt alive, humming subtly in her grasp. She practiced the movements she had seen Elias execute, the low-to-the-ground glide, the lightning-fast parry, the brutal linear thrust. She taught her body to ignore pain and embrace silence. Lord Aldrich, recognizing the weight of the moment, formally named Lyra the Guardian of the Vanguard. Her political rivals were silenced by the undeniable proof of Mistress Ilara's treason, and the memory of Elias's sacrifice fueled the city's trust in her. Lyra was no longer a refugee. She was the spiritual successor to the Shadow Walker, the living embodiment of Atheria's stubborn hope. Far away at Castle Vraden the atmosphere was toxic. Queen Seraphina was not resting, she was slowly, agonizingly healing. Her ancient immortality struggled against the devastating impact of the silver-laced iron, which had penetrated deep into her system. Her wounds weeped black ichor, and the slightest movement sent waves of burning pain through her body. Her wings were permanently crippled, reduced to scarred, useless black leather. She sat on her throne, a figure of terrifying wounded majesty. General Kalen attended her, his loyalty absolute despite his queen's humiliation. The healers assure me you will recover, my queen. But the process will be slow. We must consolidate our forces and wait. Seraphina spat blood onto the cold stone floor. Wait. I have never waited for a human, Kalen. I have been defeated not by an army, but by a ghost, and the audacity of a refugee girl. That humiliation is a festering wound worse than this silver poisoning. Her strategy was no longer conquest. It was personal, genocidal revenge. I will not waste my time with sieges. I will not engage in politics. The goal is simple, total, irreversible despair. If they believe in the ghost, I will show them the futility of their faith. Seraphina's new plan was threefold, designed to break the human spirit permanently. 1. The famine campaign. Knowing Lyra now controlled the logistics, Seraphina ordered all outlying vampire forces to relentlessly target human farmlands and smaller supply caravans across the northern borders. The goal was to force Atheria to drain its reserves quickly, starving the city without a direct assault. 2. The Shadow Purge. Seraphina dispatched her few remaining elite winged sentinels, the only units fast enough, to systematically hunt down and destroy the remaining small settlements and refugee groups that Lyra had helped establish. She was eliminating the source of Lyra's compassion and resolve. 3. The Scorn of the Undead. Most cruelly, Seraphina issued a decree: all captured human warriors were to be converted into grave knights, superghouls heavily armored and imbued with the captured despair of their former selves. These creatures would then be sent back to Atheria's borders, forcing the humans to fight their own betrayed kind. Let the Guardian of the Vanguard watch her people starve, let her see her kin kill each other, and let her realize that her hope is merely a slow death, Kalen, Seraphina hissed. Then and only then will I return to watch the surrender. 3 months passed. The false peace ended abruptly. Seraphina's famine campaign was brutally effective. Refugees poured into Atheria, bringing nothing but tales of burned fields and ruined harvests. Lyra's carefully managed central supplies began to dwindle under the influx. Lord Aldrich convened an emergency council. We have enough food for maybe 2 more months, Aldrich announced grimly. The Queen is not attacking the walls, but she is tightening the noose. We must send out expeditions to secure food. Lyra knew this was exactly what Seraphina wanted, to lure out Atheria's defenders into open, vulnerable terrain. If we send armed expeditions we will lose men and resources, Lyra countered. We must use the tunnels and the old mountain paths, the supply routes Elias used for the riverbend survivors. Small, fast, silent teams. We need someone who can move unseen and know the safest, smallest farmlands left untouched by the vampire patrols. She looked directly at Aldrich. I will lead the first team, my lord. I know those paths, and I can move like the Shadow Walker. Aldrich tried to dissuade her. You are the guardian, Lyra. You are too valuable. A guardian who watches her people starve is no guardian at all, Lyra stated firmly, tapping the hilt of vengeance now strapped to her back. I know the risk. I will take only the fastest scouts. We will move tonight. Lyra led a small team of 4 highly trained, silent scouts out of the city under the cover of a freezing night. Her heart pounded, but her focus was absolute. She was wearing a rough, dark version of Elias's leather armor, and vengeance felt like a natural extension of her arm. They followed the treacherous mountain paths, aiming for a small, isolated valley known for its hidden grain stores. As they descended into the foothills, they encountered their first obstacle, a small patrol of damper trackers. The trackers were positioned perfectly, guarding the narrow pass. They were subtle, unlike Forlag's brutes. Lyra signaled her team to hold back. Elias wouldn't fight them all. He would eliminate the leader and disappear. She moved first. Using the environment, a dense cluster of blackthorn bushes, she slipped forward. The damper leader, a grim-faced woman named Nissa, saw a flicker of movement and raised her crossbow. But Lyra was already there. She had closed the distance with a low glide that was almost identical to Elias's signature move. Nissa gasped, startled by the impossible speed. Lyra didn't give her time to think. She used vengeance. Not with Elias's crushing force, but with a terrifying precision she had practiced relentlessly. She did not swing, she thrust. The point of the dark blade, imbued with silver essence, found the narrow gap in Nissa's throat armor. The damper collapsed without a sound. The 2 remaining trackers looked on in shock. They hadn't seen the human approach. They had seen only a flash of silver and dark leather, a terrifying echo of the Shadow Walker. Before they could rally, Lyra's scouts were upon them, quickly dispatching the disoriented enemies. Lyra stood over Nissa's body, her hands trembling but her gaze cold. This was her first kill as the successor. It was clean, efficient, and lethal. The debt was being repaid, 1 life at a time. We move, Lyra commanded, her voice low and steady. We take the supplies and leave no trace. The Queen must not know the Shadow Walker lives on. The supply run was a success. Lyra returned to Atheria having not only secured vital grain but having also demonstrated that the spirit of Elias was not buried in the crater. It was walking the earth, armed with vengeance and guarding humanity. Lyra's initial success in the mountains was a small bomb on a rapidly worsening wound. Saraphina's famine campaign intensified, and the Shadow Purge began in earnest. Winged sentinels, now operating far from the centralized army, hunted down the tiny, isolated settlements Lyra had helped establish during the siege. Reports trickled into Atheria, villages wiped out, entire families gone, leaving no survivors and no bodies. Seraphina was methodically erasing the very people Lyra felt responsible for. This cruelty was followed by the devastating psychological blow, the arrival of the Grave Knights. They appeared at the outskirts of the city, a unit of 100 walking dead warriors. They were clad in blackened human armor, their faces hidden by grotesque, spiked helms. They moved with the eerie, disciplined silence of trained fighters, but with the inhuman speed of ghouls. Lord Aldrich, observing them from the parapet, turned to Lyra, his face etched with horror. They are human warriors, Lyra. Captured men from the north. The Queen has turned them. She's forcing us to fight our own kind, corrupted. The sight was unbearable. Atheria's defending soldiers, seeing the grotesque figures that were once their comrades, faltered. This was a psychological trap. Fighting monsters was one thing, fighting the betrayed dead was another. Lyra felt a wave of nausea, recognizing the depth of Seraphina's sadism. This was the true venom of trust, forcing humans to become the executioners of their own despair. We cannot engage them conventionally, my lord, Lyra said, gripping the hilt of vengeance. If we fight them with arrows and blades, we only add more grave knights to the Queen's ranks when they fall. This is a battle for the soul, not the wall. The grave knights did not attack immediately. They stood just out of arrow range, perfectly silent, radiating cold dread. Seraphina wanted them to be seen, to remind the city of its failures. Lyra knew the longer they stood there, the more the city's resolve would crumble. She had to face them. She took only vengeance. She lowered the ropes and slipped over the wall, descending to the ground outside the protective archer's range. She walked slowly, deliberately, across the open field towards the silent ranks of the Grave Knights. A murmur of protest rose from the walls, but Lord Aldrich silenced it. He recognized the profound risk she was taking, a demonstration of courage needed to break the curse. Lyra stopped 50 yards from the enemy. She raised vengeance high above her head, letting the pale moonlight catch the dark, rune-covered blade. One of the Grave Knights stepped forward from the ranks. He was taller than the rest, his movements carrying a disturbing familiarity. As he approached, Lyra recognized the markings on his armor, the crest of the Northern Guard. Her heart shattered. She knew this man. It was Captain Torvin, the very officer who had opposed her in the council chamber, the man who had, however mistakenly, questioned her loyalty. He was now a husk, a puppet of the Queen. Captain Torvin/Grave Knight raised a massive rusted axe. His eyes, visible behind the helm's slits, were dull, dead silver. Lyra felt the internal struggle. Elias had taught her to be cold, to be efficient. But this was Torvin. This was the cost of the last battle. Torvin, Lyra whispered, her voice tight with grief. Look at me. Look past the rot. I am Lyra. We fought for the same thing. The Grave Knight did not respond with words, but with a guttural, inhuman shriek. He lunged, his axe swinging in a wide, powerful arc, corrupted strength backing the blow. Lyra acted purely on reflex, the muscle memory of the Shadow Walker taking over. She did not parry the axe head. She deflected the hilt with a quick movement of vengeance, forcing the blow wide. She then moved in dangerously close, avoiding the heavy armor. Elias's rule: attack the soul, not the flesh. Lyra plunged vengeance not into Torvin's body but into his heart. The dark, silver-laced steel was meant to cut the very magic that sustained the undead. There was no scream, only a deep, agonizing, rattling gasp. The dead silver of Torvin's eyes flared briefly, showing a flicker of pain, a fleeting trace of the human soul trapped within the corruption. Then the light vanished entirely. The Grave Knight did not bleed. He simply crumbled, his grotesque armor falling empty to the earth, the soul finally released from its torment. The remaining Grave Knights froze. They had witnessed the terrifying simplicity of the act. The Shadow Walker's blade had not just killed their puppet, it had offered mercy. Lyra stood over the fallen armor, her chest heaving, the stench of corrupted flesh overwhelming. She looked up at the silent ranks of the remaining undead. You are not monsters. Lyra shouted, her voice echoing the resolve Elias had embodied. You are victims. The Queen made you a tool of our despair. But the Shadow Walker's blade offers release. We will not fight you, we will free you. The Grave Knights were designed to terrify, not strategize. They were programmed to attack when provoked. Confused by the sight of their leader's immediate disintegration and Lyra's impassioned, non-aggressive stance, their formation wavered. One by one they began a slow, shambling advance. Lyra braced herself. She knew the cost. She was not an army, she was an executioner of mercy. The battle that followed was not one of glory but of grim necessity. Lyra moved with the deadly speed she had learned, targeting the hearts of the corrupted knights, allowing the purified silver of vengeance to sever the magical bonds holding them to the Queen's will. She fought alone, moving constantly to avoid their heavy, predictable blows and offering quick, silent release. Her scouts, watching from the wall, understood. They did not fire arrows. They cheered her not for killing but for freeing their brethren. By the time the sun began to rise, the field was littered with empty, black armor. Lyra stood alone, exhausted, covered in dust and sweat, but alive. The Grave Knights were no more. Word of the bizarre, one-sided battle reached Saraphina at Vreden. She learned that Lyra had not only defeated the Grave Knights but had turned the psychological warfare back on her, transforming an act of terror into an act of hope and compassion. The girl? Lyra, Saraphina whispered, her voice cold with calculation. She learns too fast. She understands the nature of despair. She is not merely the successor to Elias, she is the evolution of his threat. Saraphina realized that her strategy of attrition and terror was failing. Lyra countered brute force with intelligence, and psychological warfare with moral clarity. The Queen's rage transformed into a chilling, absolute obsession. Kaelin, she commanded, her eyes fixed on a distant point, I want no more games. No more subtle campaigns. The source of their strength is the Shadow Walker's blade, vengeance, and the hope it represents. We must find a way to neutralize that blade. Find the last surviving members of the ancient vampire technocracy, those who deal in runes, magic and anti-human weaponry. I want a weapon, a curse, anything that will shatter vengeance and leave the girl exposed. Seraphina was now dedicating her entire empire's resources to solving a single problem: Lyra and the blade. The war was about to become a contest of ancient magic versus modern courage. The defeat of the Grave Knights solidified Lyra's position in Atheria. She became more than a guardian, she was a spiritual leader, the Iron Heart of Atheria. Her act of mercy had broken the Queen's psychological assault. Lord Aldrich, completely humbled, granted Lyra full operational command, relegating himself to the Council's advisory role. Lyra used this authority to centralize the remaining refugee groups and intensify her training. She didn't just train soldiers, she trained scouts and infiltrators, teaching them to move through the shadows, preparing the city for a war that would be fought not on the walls, but in the wilderness. She was building an entire shadow network. Meanwhile, Queen Seraphina was consumed by her new singular goal: destroying vengeance. General Kalen, under immense pressure, used the ancient dark resources of Vraden to locate the last known enclave of the ancient vampire technocracy. This shadowy faction had always viewed Seraphina's militaristic rule as crude, preferring the subtle mastery of blood runes and metaphysical weaponry. The enclave was found deep beneath the volcanic mountains of the south, led by an enigmatic ancient master named Zarek. Seraphina, despite her crippling wounds, made the arduous journey. She was received by Zarek, a skeletal vampire whose skin was covered in pulsating, glowing blue runic tattoos. "You seek power, matriarch?" Zarek asked, his voice a dry rustle of parchment. "The power you lost to a child and a ghost." "I seek to destroy a blade," Zarek, Seraphina hissed, her voice hoarse. "A simple, dark blade named vengeance that carries the essence of their dead hope and burns my kind. Tell me how to shatter it." Zarek smiled, a frightening widening of his paper-thin lips. "A vengeance. It is not a simple blade, matriarch. It was forged in the Forge of Final Breath, consecrated by the original Silent Blade Order using the purified spirits of those lost to your kin. Its power is not in the metal but in the purified grief of humanity. It is the antithesis to our blood magic." Zarek revealed the terrible secret. To destroy vengeance you cannot use conventional metal or fire. You must use its opposite. You must forge a weapon with pure concentrated ancient vampire despair, a dark relic known as the Soul Shard of Forlag. Lord Forlag, the brute lieutenant whom Elias had crippled and whose men Lyra had defeated, was now a pathetic, mad figure, kept alive only for his strategic value. Zarek explained that Forlag, having suffered total humiliation and the loss of his entire legion, was a vessel of perfect vampire despair. "We must ritualistically extract the concentrated essence of Forlag's rage, grief and terror, his soul shard," Zarek instructed. "We then merge this shard with a highly unstable, magically inert obsidian core. The resulting weapon, the Shatter-Axe, will not merely cut the blade vengeance. It will attempt to reverse its magic, turning the hope it carries back into the darkest despair, killing Lyra's spirit." Seraphina, though disgusted by the weakness of Forlag, embraced the plan. This was the level of cruelty she needed. The ritual was long and horrific. 4 days, the sounds of Forlag's endless, maddened screams echoed beneath the volcano as Zarek extracted the final dregs of his betrayed essence. Finally, the Shatter-Axe was complete, a grotesque, unstable weapon of pure obsidian, pulsing faintly with Forlag's concentrated misery. Seraphina strapped the terrifying weapon to her side. Her wounds were mostly healed, though the scars remained, a permanent reminder of Elias's success. With her full power restored and armed with a weapon designed to negate Lyra's greatest asset, the Queen was ready to return. "Kalen, prepare the army. We march on Atheria one final time," Seraphina commanded, her voice cold with finality. "But this time the target is not the city. The target is the blade. When vengeance shatters, Atheria will fall into a silence from which it will never awake." Lyra, unaware of the arcane threat being prepared, had focused her new shadow network on tracking the movements of the remaining vampire forces. Her scouts brought back troubling news. General Kalen's troops were moving but not towards Atheria. They were moving towards the northern passes, the same paths Lyra used for her successful supply runs. "She's not attacking the city," Lyra, Aldrich warned. "She's trying to cut off our retreat and isolate us completely. She knows we have nowhere else to go." Lyra studied the maps. "No, Aldrich. She's not trying to cut off retreat. She's trying to cut off the future. The northern passes lead to the last remaining free human villages in the far north, the villages who are now inspired by our victory. If Kalen reaches them, he will destroy them, crushing the last glimmer of external hope we have left. Lyra knew this was another strategic feint, one designed to draw her out of the city and force a confrontation on unfavorable ground. She could not risk the city, but she could not let the last free humans be massacred either. She looked down at Vengeance. The blade was humming faintly, sensing the approaching evil. "I must go, my lord," Lyra stated, her voice resolute. "Elias protected my people at the river bend to give Atheria a chance. I must protect the north to give all of humanity a chance. If Saraphina is attacking the northern passes, that is where the Shadow Walker's blade must be." Lyra assembled her team, her fastest and most loyal scouts, and 2 engineers who understood demolition. She would move into the north to intercept Kalen, drawing the final confrontation away from Atheria's walls. The final battle was inevitable, but Lyra would choose the field. She would face the full force of Saraphina's army, with the queen herself carrying the unstable, magical weapon designed specifically to destroy her blade and her soul. The northern passes were a maze of high, jagged peaks and narrow canyons, choked with heavy snow and biting winds. It was desolate terrain, treacherous even without an army. This was the route General Kalen was taking, leading a massive, heavily armed force of thousands toward the last free human settlements. Lyra and her small Shadow Network team, 6 scouts and the 2 demolition experts, moved through the passes like ghosts. They were faster and knew the hidden tracks better than Kalen's armored columns, who were slowed by the snow and the massive siege equipment they still carried, remnants of the failed Atheria campaign. Lyra's strategy was not to win a battle, but to cripple the enemy's momentum until the passes became a logistical nightmare for Kalen. She chose her ambush point, the Serpent's Neck, a deep canyon where the path narrowed to only 50 feet wide, with high, unstable cliffs on either side. As Kalen's vanguard entered the canyon, Lyra's team struck. The 2 demolition experts, under Lyra's precise direction, triggered a series of carefully placed charges in the canyon walls. The resulting avalanche of snow and rock buried the vanguard instantly, creating a devastating, impassable choke point. Kalen, riding further back in the column, roared in frustration. "Stop. Clear the path. We are sitting targets here." But Lyra and her scouts were everywhere. They used the high ground, launching small, precise volleys of fire arrows at the supply wagons and fuel caches, turning the immobilized column into a burning mess of chaos and noise. They didn't linger, they struck and retreated, disappearing back into the blinding snow. Kalen tried to advance, but his heavy troops were trapped between the initial collapse and the rear supply line that was now ablaze. The general realized he was fighting not an army, but the elusive, terrifying tactics of the Shadow Walker's successor. "She is using the mountains against us," Kalen yelled to his bewildered officers. "She is turning this pass into a grave. We must flush her out. Send the winged sentinels to the high peaks. Find the Shadow Walker." The winged sentinels were faster. They used their flight advantage to quickly locate the small team of humans hiding in a shallow cave high on the mountainside. Lyra saw their shadows approach, 3 huge, armored vampires descending rapidly. She knew this was the end of the skirmish. The true fight was starting. "Team scatter. Use the tunnels. Leave no trace. I will draw them higher," Lyra commanded. Lyra stepped out of the cave mouth, vengeance ready. She deliberately exposed herself, knowing that her survival depended on her ability to bait the enemy. She scaled the sheer cliff face, moving with a desperate, practiced agility, drawing the sentinels upwards. The sentinels pursued her relentlessly. They were faster, but Lyra used the narrow ledges and icy grips, forcing the larger vampires to slow their flight to avoid crashing into the rock. She bought her team precious minutes. As she reached the highest, most exposed peak, the true hunter arrived. A massive, dark shape descended from the swirling clouds, Queen Seraphina. She landed heavily on the peak, her scarred, powerful body radiating cold malice. She carried the obsidian Shatter-Axe slung over her shoulder. The 2 remaining sentinels immediately landed and knelt. Lyra stood alone on the icy pinnacle, the wind whipping her dark clothes and hair. She faced the fully recovered, rage-fueled queen, the embodiment of ancient evil. "You," Saraphina said, her voice a deep, resonant growl, tinged with a terrifying calm. "The refugee girl. The thief who stole my peace. You have the arrogance of your dead shadow. I have the justice of his memory, matriarch," Lyra countered, gripping vengeance tightly. The dark blade was vibrating intensely, sensing the immense magical corruption of the queen's new weapon. Seraphina smiled, a cruel, cold expression. I came here to kill an army, but I found the root of the pestilence instead. I am not here to fight you, Lyra. I am here to destroy what you represent. Seraphina raised the Shatter-Axe. The obsidian weapon pulsed with a faint, sickening blue light, the trapped despair of Lord Forlag. This weapon, the Shatter-Axe, was forged from absolute failure. It will shatter your pitiful blade, vengeance, and when it breaks, the grief of your entire species will be concentrated back into your soul. You will not die quickly, Lyra. You will die drowning in eternal despair. Lyra knew she couldn't match the Queen's strength or the magical corruption of the axe. The only chance was speed and vengeance's inherent protective power. Seraphina attacked first, a devastating, sweeping blow aimed not at Lyra, but at the blade in her hand. The Queen intended to end the fight instantly. Lyra met the blow. Crunch. The sound was deafening, the collision of pure magic and counter-magic. Lyra was thrown back, skidding across the ice. Her arms screamed in agony, but vengeance held. A shower of corrupted obsidian sparks flew off the axe, and the blade in Lyra's hand pulsed violently, absorbing the spiritual attack. Impossible. Seraphina roared and raged. It should have broken. Hope is harder than hate, matriarch. Lyra shouted, despite the searing pain in her wrists. Lyra pressed her attack, forcing Seraphina into an unexpected, aggressive exchange. Lyra used Elias's signature technique, speed, not force. She darted in, aiming not for a wound, but for the Queen's scarred, crippled wings, the symbol of Elias's partial victory. She struck one of the wing joints. The clean cut wasn't deep enough to sever, but it drew black, viscous blood and caused the Queen to shriek in pain, the memory of her previous injury surfacing. Seraphina lashed out wildly, abandoning the axe's intended function. She fought like a cornered animal, using her superior strength to pin Lyra down. She slammed the obsidian Shatter-Axe down, trying to crush Lyra's shield arm. Lyra rolled out of the way just in time, but the axe struck the icy rock where she had been standing. The impact was catastrophic. The unstable, magical weapon triggered a massive structural failure in the mountain itself. The ice sheet on the peak cracked. The entire pinnacle began to groan, separating from the main mountain range. Seraphina, momentarily unbalanced, realized the peril. Lyra seized the opportunity. She thrust vengeance deep into the icy rock, anchoring herself, and then used her free hand to grapple the Queen's armored legs. If I fall, you fall with me. Lyra screamed, pulling with all her might. Seraphina thrashed, trying to free herself, but the ground was unstable. The enormous weight of the Queen, coupled with Lyra's desperate anchor, was too much. With a final, shattering crack, the entire peak broke free. Seraphina, Lyra, and the two sentinels tumbled downwards into the deep, frozen canyon. The fall was hundreds of feet, a terrifying mix of freefall and crashing against sharp rock and ice. The two sentinels were killed instantly, crushed against the canyon walls. Seraphina, though immensely durable, was grievously injured by the impact, hitting the canyon floor with a bone-jarring thud. Her armor was shattered, and the silver remnants of the earlier attack finally forced their way into her exposed internal organs. Lyra, protected by the dense, falling snow and the momentum of the Queen's body taking the worst of the impact, was alive but barely conscious. Her leg was broken and she was battered beyond recognition. Seraphina struggled to rise from the debris. She was dying, the combined trauma and silver poisoning finally overwhelming her immortality. She saw Lyra, miraculously still gripping vengeance, trying to crawl toward her. Seraphina raised the Shatter-Axe one last time. You will not win, human. The debt remains. Lyra knew she had no strength left for a final blow. But she still had vengeance. With a final, primal roar, Lyra did the only thing left. She didn't throw the sword, she thrust it into the ground between them just as Elias had done. This time, however, she didn't just release energy. She poured her entire being, her pain, her hope, her sacrifice, and the accumulated grief of the blade, into the earth. The anti-vampiric energy of vengeance was released in a focused, white-hot torrent directly into the unstable obsidian of the Shatter-Axe. The result was cataclysmic. The axe, charged with Forlag's pure despair, was forced to confront its opposite. It overloaded. The Shatter-Axe exploded into millions of pieces of corrupted obsidian dust. The resulting surge of energy was contained, localized, and devastating to the vampire. Seraphina shrieked, a sound of agony and ultimate defeat. The explosion didn't just injure her, it annihilated the remaining corruption in her blood, purifying her body of the vampire curse, but at the cost of her life force. Her immense, immortal power was stripped away instantly. She collapsed, a withered ancient figure, gazing at Lyra with eyes that held only the confusion of a soul returned to its mortal shell. "The debt is paid," Seraphina whispered, her mortal heart giving out. The Crimson Matriarch was dead. The ancient terror was over. Lyra lay in the snow, broken but alive. The war was over. General Kalen, seeing the catastrophic explosion and sensing the death of his queen, ordered a frantic, immediate retreat. The vampire legions broke, their will crushed by the loss of their immortal leader. Lyra's scouts found her days later, sheltering in a small hidden cave, tending to her broken leg. She was holding vengeance, which was now glowing faintly, its dark metal pulsing with a gentle, steady light. It was no longer a weapon of grief, but a symbol of peace. Lyra returned to Atheria not as a warrior but as a legend. She brought back the news of the queen's death and with it the quiet certainty of peace. Lord Aldrich knelt before her and the people cheered. Lyra had fulfilled Elias's final purpose. She had paid the debt. The Vampire Queen had ridiculed the legends of human warriors, but she had been defeated and killed by the very hope she sought to extinguish. Lyra, the refugee who became the Shadow Walker's successor, went on to lead the rebuilding of the human kingdoms, ensuring the legend of Elias and the victory of Atheria would live on for millennia.